I'm Nick von Wackerbarth, and you're listening to the VonDubCast. If you don't want to listen to me gap in the intro and you want to skip right to the interview, skip about 10 minutes. But before you do, please consider doing one of these couple things that really helps out the show. Following the social medias for the VonDubCast, subscribing, and leaving a review. If you could do those things, that'd be awesome. Also, give me a subscription on the YouTube channel. That'd be great too. All right, welcome everybody to episode 63, I believe, of the VonDubCast. Really fun episode with another one of my good friends from Lister, Jennifer Meyer. It's really interesting for me to do these kind of conversations with all different types of people I know well, people I know not at all, and everyone in between. And it's so fun to see the other side of a 3-hour conversation with no phones, just how much more you understand somebody and or how much you can get to know them in just that short of time. I think you don't ever do that, and you don't see what type of connection you can make because we just are so distracted by so many things. So I'm really enjoying this process. Really enjoyed this conversation. It was so much fun to reminisce a bit, test some ideas. Jenn is a really smart person and has a really interesting take on things, and always has I always thought she had a really interesting viewpoint on almost every topic. And again, I've brought this up about a couple of people like Yelena Makura and I don't know, maybe this is just myself, but I find that I find this a lot more times with females than males in my life, but they really push back and they'll call you on your bullshit. And if you aren't explaining yourself well enough, or if your points and your backups aren't well enough, you're going to hear about it. And I just love that. Nothing gets me more excited than a conversation where you have to push the extent of what you're saying and really be impeccable with your word. And that is one of my favorite things to do. And so I had a really fun conversation. This one was recorded probably almost a month ago at this point. I've got so many episodes in the can ready to go. I'm getting a little bit behind on the release to the time that they were recorded, just because there's so many to get out. And I don't think that's a bad thing. It's just a little bit, some of this stuff might be outdated. There's a lot of things that have happened since the start of the month. So if we do say something that sounds like, oh, maybe it's a little different now, or we're in a bit of a different situation, that's just one of those things. But I just wanted to give you guys kind of an idea of when this was recorded. And I think you guys are really going to like this. We talked some dodgeball, some politics, a lot of COVID stuff, kind of what we see, kind of Jen's journey since she graduated and is now back in school, what that's looking like, some questions about what nursing school looks like, which I'm always really interested about. I think there's for somebody that chirps the university system and the school system so much, I am very curious for some degrees how they teach it and what's being taught and what kind of methods and where do they place importance, because I think there's meat on the bone there. There's something to be learned by learning how other professions teach and where they put their value and what types of things they're looking for. I feel like it helps you understand. And then for whatever reason, if you ever have to interact in that world of whatever it is, you kind of have a little bit better of a framework to work with. So that's always really interesting to me. Maybe that's a little bit of an idea of what makes these types of conversations interesting for me, so that you guys can follow along in the same vein. Other than that, had a really amazing weekend. Was up in the city with a lot of family. Not gonna say exactly why, but just because sometimes stories aren't exactly yours to tell, especially right away when everybody's dealing with something. But I'm gonna try and find my way to say it without saying too much. It was just got to see a lot of family this weekend that throughout COVID we haven't been able to see. And really come together. Saw some of the wide range of emotions. Saw some of the most beauty I've ever seen this weekend, and some of the most sadness. And I think those are the dualities. And I talk about this on the podcast all the time. One doesn't exist without the other, and you need to have that. And that's what makes these moments so beautiful. And for somebody that has done a lot of deep diving into these subjects and the subject of death and reading all these books, The Worm at the Core and Don't Think About Death and all these things, and just kind of what I went through over the last year, and really understanding how imperative it is to have your own baggage with mortality and the fact that we're all going to die one day in order, and how that represents in your life, to see it all come right in front of you and see those lessons in action, and to in all those readings to know that no matter how much you know, it's never going to be easy, and it's always going to hurt. And that is just one of those things that come with it. But to be able to be there for other people and to hold that strength and to be able to not be so caught up in the sadness, not to see that beauty, because there was just amazing beauty. And yeah, it's just kind of weird. I said this right from the start of the podcast that it's one of those things where as you dive into it and start, it feels like you're getting onto the right path, which is what it feels like the further I get into this podcast. It seems like things just fall into place, and work you were doing pays off, even though you don't know why, what's drawing you to learn in a certain domain. You find out 6 months later or whatever it is that something big is about to come into your life and you're going to have to deal with it. And all those lessons you learn are totally applicable. And I don't know, I think there's a lot of beauty in that. And yeah, it was an amazing weekend, a tough weekend, but an amazing weekend. It was really nice to see some family. Personally, the fights, congratulations to Alex Martinez fighting out of Grand Prairie, great Paraguayan, I don't know. He's from Paraguay, but he fights out of Grand Prairie, and he had a big win in PFL on Friday. Only even got signed to the PFL, 3 weeks ago, short notice, comes in, got the W, split decision. I think there's some controversy because I commented on his post and I got attacked by about 50 different people that could speak broken English that were just not very happy with me that I was supporting my guy from Grand Prairie. But you know what? That's the fight game. There's a lot of passion in it. We see that. So awesome. Big shout out to him. And then, what an amazing card last night. UFC 262, 261, whatever it was. The Usman Rose Valentina card. This was fights that I've been looking for. This card in particular, I've been looking forward to for so long. So many of these fighters are people that I'm deeply, deeply connected with. I know that's going to sound silly, but since I rejoined the sport head over heels in about 2015, there was a bunch of people that I really connected with and followed their journeys and haven't missed a fight with. And all three of the main event, Kamaru Usman, Valentina Shevchenko, and Rose Namajunas are all three of those people that I haven't missed a fight of since I got back into the UFC. I've watched their journeys. I've watched every interview. I've seen who they are as people and what they can do. And just to see them be able to put on that type of performance was just absolutely incredible. So hard to see Chris Weidman suffer an injury like that. And all the weirdness around it, the fact that the first time we saw that injury was against Chris Weidman in the rematch with Anderson Silva, when Anderson Silva broke his leg in the exact same manner. And then for the last person to fight Anderson Silva was Uriah Hall, and kind of had his retirement fight. Then Uriah Hall matches up with Weidman 17 seconds in to see that same injury that first was inflicted, I guess, against Weidman, now to happen to Weidman, and just such a salt of the earth guy. He just lost his father-in-law, which is so impactful in his life if you've listened to any of his interviews, and just was training down in South Carolina, was training with Wonder Boy. Everybody that you talked to said he was looking just absolutely amazing and was back to his old self. He just got neck surgery. He was finally able to put himself back to where he was a couple years ago, when he was just unstoppable, and everyone saw that Chris Weidman was going to be the next thing when he won the belt and all that. It was just really tough to see, but that's the fight game. Like we said, just like we talk about, you need that sadness to find the beauty in life. You need those that agony of what the fight game can do to show you the aspects and what these guys are risking when they step in there, and for people just to write the sport off as barbaric or whatever it is, right? Like, you just don't understand. Like, this is what makes those moments, like those moments we got to see when Rose landed that head kick. Those moments don't happen without that risk of what these people are doing. And I just think that's such a beautiful sentiment and something that we all need to keep in mind. So I just wanted to put a big thank you for the UFC for putting on an amazing event like that and letting me enjoy it. I'm probably going to have to do a solo podcast just on that alone, or maybe get somebody else on to talk some UFC. Have a really amazing MMA conversation coming out with Andrew Mavridis sometime in the next couple of weeks. That was really fun. Like always, if you could do all the little things, liking all the social media pages, sharing the posts, been getting some really good reaction right now. The podcast is growing. It's so nice to see. Thank you guys all so much for that. This is another amazing interview. This was one of my personal favorites. I know I say that a lot because I really enjoy all of them, but I think probably the next, almost every episode I have recorded is awesome, and I can't wait to get to you guys. So hurry up, listen to this one, and I'll have the next one to you guys soon. All right. See you guys. All right. Thanks for being here, Jen.
Well, thanks for having me.
Oh, no, it's been, people always say that, like, thanks for having me, but it's like, it is something that is honorable in my head. Like, if I ask you on, I clearly want you on, but it's also like, I feel guilty saying that because I love this so much and I have so much fun that people are like, oh, thanks for having me on. It's like, you don't realize how much I'm enjoying this. I get way more out of this than anybody ever gets to when they come and sit down. So kind of is a funny feeling there.
I thought that might be the case after you asked me like 3 times.
Yeah, well, I want to get so much better, but like I'm gated by how much better I can get by how many people I can convince to come on so I can practice, which really throws a loop into it because like if it was up to me and I had unlimited people that were coming in, I'd probably do like 2 a day every day. Like maybe take 1 day a week off. And like I'm hoping that eventually I can get to that point if I grow it to that point and I have like people wanting to come on and like asking to come on and promote stuff. But until then, it's just going to be me bugging all my friends until they come on. And sometimes it takes 3 asks, sometimes it takes 10. But if you give me even the inch of like, hey, maybe I'm going to ask you again. Like unless you say like, hell no, I'm never doing that. And even then I might ask again if I did that. But like for the most part, it's just anybody that gives me a foot in the door, I'm going to keep bugging them until they come on. Yeah.
Okay, so it was actually pretty easy to convince.
Extremely easy, yeah. Compared to some of the other ones, yeah, no, it was really good. And also what's nice too is that like we've talked about it and that you've listened to a couple episodes because that's always intimidating for me when somebody comes on that like I've bugged a bunch of times. I know they've never listened to it and have no idea what they're about to walk into, right? And then it's like, I know they're going to have fun at the end of it, but I'm always just like making sure that I can make them as comfortable as possible, like leading up to it. Like I said, like people get so nervous beforehand and after 5 minutes, it's fine because they realize, oh, we're just having a conversation. I do this all the time. But it's just one of those things where I just feel me feeling their nervousness makes me feel so guilty that I'm putting them through it because I just like this so much. And I know that it's kind of funny, but yeah, so we met in Lister. I was in my first year. I think you were in your first year, but maybe you'd done something else. We're a year apart, but
yeah, I was in my first year in Lister, but I had done a year at the U of A before that.
Right. And what was your first degree in?
I have a double major in physical sciences and earth and atmospheric sciences.
Ooh.
But it's just a general science degree, so pretty useless.
So like what kind of stuff would you learn in that? Because like that title told me like a little bit, but not much.
So physics, chemistry, math, and earth science.
Okay. And earth science is like all the weather stuff? I never took an earth sciences class. I feel like I was the only person in all of U of A that didn't take an earth sciences class.
It was a little bit of weather stuff. I took a couple of those classes, but for the most part, it was like rocks, minerals, stuff like that.
That's fair. That's even funner than weather, rocks, right? The funnest of all the subjects?
Well, you'd have to learn these formulas that are just like 5 miles long.
Rock formulas?
Yeah, it was not my favorite.
Yeah, not your favorite.
Definitely not what I wanted to end up doing.
And after you graduated, you decided to go back for more punishment.
Well, actually, I applied for the RCMP.
Right.
And then I spent I think it was 18 months in my RCMP application. Mm-hmm. And then I didn't get in. Because I'm a bad person.
Oh yeah, is that what they told you? Is that what they stamped it? Bad person on your application?
Bad person, get out of here.
Yeah, big red stamp.
Don't reapply for 3 years.
Wow, 3 years, hey? Is that what they actually say?
Yeah.
What's going to change in 3 years? Like if they, I don't know.
I would have been a better person.
Oh well, hopefully. Maybe it'd be worse. Who knows? They don't know.
Well, the 3 years is now. So if I wanted to reapply now, I still wouldn't get in. But
do you have any inkling? Does it still draw you at all?
No, not at all. I'm so happy I didn't get in.
Oh, really?
Yes.
What was the process like?
So you put in your initial application and it basically just has all of your personal information. Right. And then was 3 years ago again, so I'm trying to remember. Mm-hmm. But then you have to give a whole bunch of references. Right. And then I actually had to write a test.
Oh, really?
Yeah. With the Edmonton Police, you don't have to write a test if you have a degree, but with the RCMP, you still have to do like the English test, and there's So if you don't have a degree and you go for the Edmonton Police, you have to do a test still. But if you have a degree,
I guess that's just proving that you can test take and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and you're reasonably intelligent and can speak English.
Which is funny that the RCMP or that the police force knows what has a better idea of what a degree means than 99% of society, because that's all it pretty much proves, that you can take a test. Like, it doesn't mean you're an expert in whatever subject you get, but it's so funny that they know that. But then they tell all these people the stories about, you get this degree and you're going to get a magical job and all this stuff. It's such bullshit.
It's not true.
Yeah, not even a little bit. Sorry, so you had to take a test.
Yeah. And that was easy. Like, if you have a degree and you can take a test, you're going to pass. It's going to be fine. After that, they give you this 50-page document and ask you about anything bad that you could have ever done in your whole life.
Really?
Like, down to, have you done bestiality?
Wow. So you had to admit to that?
Well, if you...
You walked into that one, Jen. Come on, you know better.
I didn't have to admit to that. But the guy... And then you have to take a polygraph test after that.
Right, I've heard of that.
So he said that you would be surprised by how often people have to admit to that.
Yeah.
Like, if you're 12 years old and you have a dog and you realize, you know, when they're licking you, it feels good.
Oh, no.
So
the worst.
Mind you, I didn't have to admit to that, but he says it's more common.
It's more common
than you would think.
He was probably looking for that one, knowing that you grew up on a farm. He's probably like,
no, you're right. You got me.
He's just waiting for you to get to that question on the test. Oh, that's funny. Oh, man, that was... So, like, how nerve-wracking... Where do you have to go to do the polygraph test? Like, is it in, like, the police department or, like, an RCMP place? Holy fuck, that'd be scary.
Yeah, there's, like, a RCMP detachment in Edmonton.
Yeah.
And then you go in there and you wait for them to call your name.
Wow.
And
Are you sitting with a bunch of other people?
No, because I was the first one.
Oh, nice.
In the morning.
Yeah.
It was like 7:30 or something like that, and they hook you up to these machines and like a strip across your head and on your fingers.
Oh, cool. Well, at least now you can say you've done a polygraph test. Not many people have got to do that.
And I passed.
You passed? Oh,
I just admitted to too many things that I did bad.
That's such bullshit. It's such a contrary too. Like, do you want me to lie? Like, come on. And I'm sure that, like, so many of the people that I know that have been police have been both good and bad. Like, I'm sure some of them probably were not completely truthful in that process, right? Like, I would imagine that's the, but then if they catch you in a lie, you're kind of just as screwed. So it doesn't really matter, but that's so unfortunate. It's quite the process though. Yeah.
If you do get caught lying, you can never reapply.
Oh, you don't just get the 3-year ban, you get the full whammy. Oh. Well, that's if you ever did want to go back. So, like, what was it that drew you to want to apply in the first place? I'm curious about that.
So when I was first graduating, I was like, I have no idea what I want.
Sounds like everybody else. Yeah.
I have a useless degree.
Yeah.
But one thing I did know about myself, and is still true, is I couldn't handle sitting at a desk. My whole life. Mm-hmm. I would hate being inside. I also like doing different things all the time. Yeah. So that was another thing. And then I also just like helping people, but as it turns out, it's not the kind of helping people that I want to do. Yeah. So it's not a bad thing that I didn't get in. Mm-hmm. And also you just get sent to nowhere.
Yeah, that's tough. Yeah, I know some people that have been sent some pretty wild places for a bit, right? And then also too, if you get sent to some wild place and you love it, and then you get sent somewhere else, you kind of got to give it up too. So you spend all this time falling in love with the new place, and then because I think they move you around every couple of years, right? Yeah, every couple of years. I think eventually you get put in the same spot. Yeah, once you have for a while, but a bit of experience. It takes a while. Yeah, which is tough, especially if you're trying to start a family or something. Like, now you have to ask that of other people to move with you wherever you get sent. Like, that is quite the experience. So yeah, like you said, I think it's probably for the best that you didn't get in, but that was exciting time. I remember talking to you a couple of times throughout that process and just asking all the questions, because you know me, I'm curious about everything. I want to ask a million questions about everything. And I was just I think you were one of the first people that I knew that went through the process that I knew well enough that I could ask all those questions. So thanks for putting up with me during that whole time. I mean, asking a million and one questions. But now you're back at the U of A. Yeah. Yeah, and you're doing nursing. Yeah, I'm in the after degree program for nursing. Right. So what's the biggest difference between the after degree and like the basically the time. So this is going to take me 2 years instead of 4. Oh wow. Oh, that's awesome. So 2 years isn't too bad. Is it like the standard 2 years, or is it like one of those condensed schedule? Oh, okay. So you only get like a couple weeks off of Christmas, couple weeks off in the summer kind of thing? Yeah, basically. I think I have all of August off from classes. Yeah. I think there's probably still finals in August, but other than that, just winter break. Yeah. And how long have you been in it now? I started in September. Okay, so not too long. Well, actually,
Yeah, so I'm going to be halfway done in August.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, like I was so unfamiliar with those condensed schedules, but then when my sister went and did physio at the U of A, it was a condensed schedule. And I was thinking, holy shit, like that's quite a bit. And then Fraser, when he went down to, or he's still down there in California doing chiropractor school, and it's like even more condensed. Like he gets I think they do like 4 semesters in a year and a week off in between all of them, and it's quite the schedule. But the 2 years versus 4 years is such a nice thing. Like, I can't imagine. Like, I bet you if it was 4 years, do you think you would have done it?
Absolutely not.
Right, exactly.
No, for sure
that is the key, and that's what is so nice about degrees like that. Like, I feel like the flexibility of what the school system should be is exactly right there, and they do it. And every once in a while, you'll find that universities, a broken clock is right twice a day. I have my own thing with the universities, but they do have some things. But it's like, the benefits of something like that are so real, and then it's like, why can't you try and find more things like that that really take this old, structured kind of way that it is and try and get more flexible and bring more people in? Like, why do we have to have it the same way as it was 100 years ago? Like, let's get creative with this thing. But how is going back now? Is it a lot different being on campus a couple of years later than when we were young bucks running around there causing havoc?
It's so much different.
Yeah?
Like first of all, I'm never on campus.
Right.
I have one lab that is on campus, and that's it.
And the
I
rest
have
is
no
all
in-person
online?
classes.
And that's just because of COVID, right?
That's because of COVID.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I have, this past semester I had 2 days a week where I was in the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So other than that, I was never on campus.
Right. And do you do it like at the university hospital?
No, I was at the Misericordia.
Oh, okay. And you kind of just get assigned wherever there's room?
Yeah.
I gotcha.
Yeah, the U of A didn't take any nursing students this semester because of COVID.
Oh.
They were just too concerned about people. Well, from our group anyway,
Right.
They might have had.
They heard that you were
uppers or
in it, so they wanted to be careful.
Get out of here.
Yeah. We saw her with the big red stamp. We can't have her around making bad decisions. Oh. But bad decisions are so fun. I feel like if you have a whole police force full of people that has never made a bad decision, how are they going to understand when sometimes bad decisions are just that, bad decisions, and it's not like the end of the world. I feel like that's almost like a detriment. You maybe need like a special force on the RCMP that has all the red stamp people on it. We just send them in when shit really gets sideways.
Yeah, one of the things that they said they didn't want me for was because I was at a party where other people were smoking weed.
It's legal, and it's also like way less detrimental than alcohol.
This was before it was legal.
Oh, okay,
though.
that makes sense. But still, like, grow up. I feel like that is, when you look at something like that, where it's like how much pain and heartache and strife is caused in the world by the criminalization of something so silly. It's like, how can people sleep at night knowing that that's what they're doing, and that there's people sitting in jail right now for like non-violent weed offenses? Like, that is absolutely ridiculous, right? And then you see them pass laws. Like, I'm sure there's people that, got arrested 2 years before weed was legalized in Canada are now sitting in jail going like, what the fuck is going on here? Oh my God, that's just the worst. Ugh, poor people. But that's why me and you don't run the world, because we'd make decisions like that, right, Jen?
Yeah, we would let people out of jail for smelling weed.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, it's so silly. So now I guess if that's there's probably more things that are probably nitpicky and all that, but like at least something like that, maybe if you went back in 3 years, if of course you did want to do it, now that it's legalized, they couldn't really hold that one against you, but they'd find other things too, right?
Yeah, the biggest thing is income tax. I was a server for 4 years.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So nobody as a server claims all of their taxes.
Right.
So I would still not get in for that reason.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I think, how do they even get any people then? Like, if they can get you on shit like that, like, who pays all of their taxes, right? Like, the whole point of taxes is to try and pay as little taxes as you can. That's
Yeah.
how the system is rigged. Like, oh my God, that's so stupid. So you're a server?
Yeah, I served that's what I did between when I graduated in 2016 and
How did
I
you
got
get
in
into
school.
that? Maybe before we get too into it, do you want to just describe what a server does?
yeah, I just waited tables.
I thought you meant process server.
No.
I thought you meant like you serve people like, I don't know why I got that. And I knew you were a server too. You worked at Chianti's.
I was wondering why you were so surprised.
I know.
by
I
that.
was just like, my head's running with all these other questions I can ask. I was just saying, like, I think because we were talking about like police and like taxes and all that stuff, like, and I don't know, I must have got in my own head about it. Well, my bad. Well, how was serving?
I actually really loved it.
Yeah, I think
It
you
is
did.
why
I used to talk to you about it, and you always talked about how much you loved it.
Yeah, I loved serving, and I would love to stay in serving. The problem is the hours.
Yeah.
So nights, weekends, and then also as you get older, you work with nobody who isn't an alcoholic, basically.
Really?
Like
I've
once
heard
you-
that about the restaurant industry as a whole.
Once you turn 30 and you're still serving, you're either an alcoholic or you're a recovering alcoholic, basically.
Really? That's interesting. And then I guess next time my food's late, I'm going to have a little bit different of a guess of what's going on there. shooting in the back. Oh, that's funny. Oh.
Yeah, so when I decided that I wanted to go into nursing, I had this little girl. She was like 2 maybe.
Yeah.
And she had just thrown up all over the place, all over the table at Chianti's. And I was cleaning everything up, getting her all set back up. And I was like, you know what? Nursing could be a lot like serving. I could do this.
Yeah. Oh, that's a wonderful way to get to it. And so far, have you been like that part of the job? Because I remember in first year, my floor was like 6K that year was all nurses. It felt like there were so many nurses on our floor, and they would come back every day smiling, and they would tell me about their day. And it's like, oh, I cleaned up shit. I got puked on, all this stuff. And they're smiling ear to ear and talking about how much they love it. And I was just like, couldn't wrap my head around that type of person. Like it's so not me that I just couldn't even put my feet in their shoes. They'd come home every day and just tell me these wild stories with this huge grin on their face. Have you got to experience that stuff yet?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, nice. So they throw you into that right away when you start school?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
well, that is honestly so smart though, because like those kids that show that and keep showing up when they're dealing with that, that's going to weed out a certain amount. Have you seen anybody drop out of the classes when they started getting shit on and puked on?
None of the people that I was
That you were
with.
in your group? I'm sure it happens though. I imagine people have an idea of what it is in their head, and then they get it and they go, okay, maybe this isn't for me. But you still love it?
Well, I wouldn't say I love that part of the job,
there's
but
other parts
you
that
see
you
the
love more.
humor in it when somebody poops on the floor, and it's just so funny.
Yeah, that's
it's still
fair.
gross,
Yeah.
and you don't want to clean it up, but it's hilarious.
Yes. And I would imagine the camaraderie of like the nursing, all the nurses and stuff and the staff, that's what makes it funny too, because like you're seeing that shit all the time. No pun intended there, but you're seeing that all the time, and like what else can you do but laugh? And then when everyone else is laughing, it makes it a lot easier to laugh at, right?
Yeah, totally.
And some of the stories that would come home of like sponge baths and all these types of things, it blew my mind that and it made me my admiration for what nurses do grew so much during that point, because I never really, I don't know, I think I'm probably very lucky that I was never in hospitals a lot as a kid. Like I think that's probably a lot of people wouldn't be able to relate to this, because I think usually throughout a childhood or something, someone that you know is sick or you spend some time in the hospital. But I think I was just really lucky as a kid. I never really had to experience it. So like my idea of what nurses was from like Grey's Anatomy and like TV shows and stuff. So I've never really seen it. And then when I think it was when my grandpa was at the end of his life, and just seeing how amazing the nurses were and how nice they were, and just like everything they did for our family and stuff. It was just like blew me away that's the type of people. And just like my respect again, just elevated so much for nurses that now I just feel like, like they might have even passed cops. And I was just like the people that I was like, no, it's the nurses. That's who's doing it. So I admire what you're doing. That is awesome.
Yeah, I actually didn't know a lot about what nurses did before I got into nursing as well.
Really?
And now that I'm in all of these classes and learning about all of the different things that you can do as a nurse, it's just so inspiring. And I'm really excited that
cool.
there's so many different things that I can do if I get bored, which will happen.
Yeah, you get bored, hey? Yeah, you're just like me. I can't do the same thing too much. What kind of things were you surprised about? Like what kind of things going in did you think were going to be different than when you got in there? It was like, oh shit, this is...
So a lot of the procedures that nurses do that you think of as what doctors do, like placing a urinary catheter is done by nurses. It's not done by doctors. And then there's a lot of like family support, like you were talking about with your grandpa, that it's not just about the patients, it's about the patient family. There's just so many more things that are within the scope of practice than I realized.
Right. Yeah. And I remember actually having a conversation with Pat when he was going through nursing school, and shout out to Pat. I think he listens to a couple episodes. I probably he's going to listen to this one. And I think I'm going to scam him on here if I can convince him maybe this summer. But, and him telling me that like, yeah, no, nurses do like almost like 90% of the shit that you envision a doctor doing, the nurses do in the hospital, right? And at that time, I hadn't really had much experience, but yeah, I noticed that. And I think I was keeping my eye out for that when I was in the hospital. Now when I am in hospitals, yeah, nurses do a huge majority of that stuff. Like that is, that's quite wild. Like I wonder if that's a newer progression, like, or if that was something like, I wonder how nursing has over. Do you ever take classes on like the history of nursing throughout the school?
Yeah, we took one class last semester that was just one brief lecture about the progression of nursing. Now I don't know if I can remember a lot of it, but it definitely has come a long way, and nurses are able to do a lot more than they used to be able to. On my unit, I never see doctors.
Really?
It's only nurses basically that take care of the patients all day, other than respiratory therapists and physiotherapists that come in to get the patients up and move them around and whatnot. But yeah, we very, very rarely ever see doctors unless there is something going really wrong.
Really, yeah.
And that's our job to see that something is going wrong.
And make that call at that point. And that's something when you mentioned like respiratory therapists, that's a profession or a specialization that probably had its, I don't know how to word this, but it's become so much more to the forefront with all COVID stuff going on. Like that was my thing. Like Liam, my sister's fiance, he's a physiotherapist at the hospital, and like it's like, well, and they kept calling him, and he's just on getting work crazy hours, like just total overtime. Like what? Like what do you need physio for if you have COVID? And I wasn't thinking then like, oh yeah, respiratory therapy and like help. I was like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? Like I feel like when you're outside of like the medical industry, you have so little idea of how it all works and like what all goes into it, and like how like even just like the scheduling of like the nurses and like who you have on staff and like what kind of specialties you need. Like you need respiratory, you need all this stuff. So then is there specialization in nurses too? Can you?
Yeah, you can go into specializations.
Okay.
There's lots of different programs that you can take after you finish. Yeah. You can do masters and get a nursing practitioner, and then you're almost like, you're just under doctors.
Oh, cool.
You can prescribe medications and stuff.
Oh, really?
There's so many more things that you can do.
And that's called a nurse practitioner?
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
And then there's also just certificates that you can get. Stuff like you have to get certified to work in the ICU, which is good because those ladies and gentlemen are just crazy.
Yeah? Have you done any time in the ICU yet?
Not yet.
And I think throughout the process, at one point, they make sure that you're on the ICU to see it?
You only go into the ICU if you want to do it as your final preceptorship.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah, they don't just let chumps in.
No, they only the creme de la creme. Oh, that's funny. Oh, I didn't even think of that. So it's probably too early to even say, but have any of the specializations or like added things on, have any of those caught your eye yet that you think you might explore later?
Well, for my final preceptorship, I haven't really thought before or beyond that. I'm thinking either oncology, so cancer, or the ICU.
Wow.
Because if you start out in those intense fields, then you can sort of move back and do a lot of different things. Right. And you're also still a student, so there's always somebody there to hold your hand if you mess up.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, that's interesting to think of it that way, of like making sure you get into the nitty gritty first and seeing that, and you can always back off after that. And I think also the learning curve of like, you need resistance to learn and to grow, right? And I feel like throwing yourself into the fire with like ICU, you would learn so quick and get like leveled up as a nurse. It's almost like, I would imagine, I shouldn't say this with my complete lack of knowledge, but it would always imagine like 1 year of ICU nursing would be like 2 years of experience doing like something other kind, like whatever the easiest one is. Is there an easiest one?
I don't think there's an easiest one.
I think if there was, you wouldn't admit it either anyways, because that hurt some feelings.
No, there isn't an easiest one, I wouldn't say. I'd say that there are different skills that make you better at some areas than others.
Yeah.
But
yeah, and you probably need that. Like I wonder if is there people throughout the degree, and maybe it's a little different going through COVID because so much more is online, but I wonder if in a normal year, if they'd be keeping their eye out for those types of person that have that personality that's going to match that type, because maybe they don't know it themselves, and maybe just see like, hey, I'm trying to think of one, like, I know what you're saying. I'm just trying to think of an example of like if they had that certain trait that would go to it, but to try and funnel them into these areas where they're needed. Because like you say, not everybody can do each role that nurses fulfill. That's became pretty apparent to me pretty quick, right? You need to be that certain kind of person. And I think that's what we saw was when I've seen nurses, since then I've been in the hospital way more times after that through work, having employees getting hurt and all that. And some of the nurses I saw there, a little bit different than what I saw on that side, right? But I was so thankful that at that time when our family was so, distraught and sad at the time, that we had the nicest nurses. And like, if some of the nurses I saw at a later date that were a little bit crabby, I was like, man, if we saw her on that day, but I'm sure they know that and they keep the one separated out. But you just, as a person that is so outside of it, you don't even see the behind the scenes working of them organizing all that. So then who organizes all the nurses too? Like, is there like a head nurse like that, like schedules everybody in that?
Yeah, there's a charge nurse that basically looks over everybody on the unit. Okay. And then there is a person above her that does all of the scheduling for more than one unit.
And they'd have like one of those for like a hospital, and they would do that, and then everybody kind of, each unit has a head.
I think it's per floor.
Oh, that makes sense.
At least in our hospital. Yeah. Because we've got 2 different units on our floor, and the same people sort of work on each side if they need to fill in. Right.
So have you been at that same hospital the whole time that you've been doing it since you started?
Yeah, the whole semester. Okay. And my first semester was entirely online, so I was still in BC at the time.
I guess if you're doing it online, you don't even need to be here. Oh.
No.
So did you even have an apartment or anything here? You just stayed there and then figured that out when you had to?
Yep.
Oh, nice.
I moved here in January during the first week of school because my apartment that I was going to get fell through. Oh, so nice. I was moving like as I was in classes. It was a nightmare.
The worst. But hey, you're here now. You're all settled in. You're loving it. I wonder, have you talked to like the profs and seen like how much different it is with COVID this year compared to, is there anything that they've said like, oh, like we're not doing this year because we can't? Like, have you heard a lot about those things?
Oh, yeah. So I've turned into a colossal nerd since
You always were. You just hit it.
That is not true. Fair. I was a dummy.
Yeah. Oh, my God.
So I go to office hours all the time and just ask, make up questions, even if I know the answers, just so that I can be talking about the stuff so it'll stick in my brain. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so many things are different. A lot of the profs really care. Mm-hmm. About our learning, so they're really struggling to figure out what is best for the students online as well. Yeah. And then there's also simulation labs that we're supposed to have access to as nursing students, so that you can go in and practice like a dressing change or whatever. And they're not able to offer that because of COVID. They just can't.
Yeah, it just isn't feasible.
Yeah, they just don't have the resources to clean everything up. And
especially when the medical field is stretched at the point, right? Like it's kind of all hands on deck. That's it's interesting because that was one of my big things that I heard right when the pandemic first started and everything closed down. I heard some really smart people saying this, and it really stuck with me. They're saying like, yeah, let's close everything down, but like medical schools and nursing schools, like that is what they're signing up for. And if you send that message that when things get tough, we close everything down, it's a really bad message and we need to leave those open. I was like, oh man, like that would have never occurred to me. Like when you're outside of it, you just don't even see those things. But I was like, man, that does make a lot of sense, right? Because like those people that are like yourself that are willing to get into that, that's not exactly what you're signing up for. I know nobody signs up for a pandemic, but you're kind of putting yourself in that line where if something like that happens, you're those people. And I was thinking like, I wonder, what kind of solutions they're going to come up with. Are they just going to wait till they can do everything online? Or are they just going to say like, well, this is the risk you got to take, come in, we need to teach you this way. And I think that's probably something that is going to happen as we figure out our way through the pandemic. I'm sure there's going to be areas where they realize, it seemed like at the start, there was no risk there was no risk we can take, right? Like any risk is too much. And now it seems we're getting to the point where there's like, okay, there might be some things that are worth risking, right? And I feel like that is almost the point that everybody's looking to get to, because I think people were frustrated that they didn't have any say, and that was the solution that got put out, is that we can't take any risk. We just need to take every single measure we can that we lose as little lives as possible, right? And I feel like, and I don't even want to make it sound like I'm shitting on that. I think that is the right thing to do at the start, especially when there were so many unknowns. You don't know. That's what you have to do. But then I think after that, you have to adjust and you have to be smart. And maybe there's a little bit lacking of that for my taste, and a little bit, I wish there's more keeping up with the science and understanding really what we're up against and that. But what can you do? It's also really hard because I feel like the government feels like everybody's so stupid that we can't be honest with them and just teach them the science of it, because they won't be able to follow it, and then they're going to get themselves in trouble, or think that it's going to get their get them to put their guard down or something. But I have more faith in people, I think, than maybe the government has. And I feel like people will figure it out if you explain it the right way, and maybe, put some things on TV instead of every commercial that just says, lockdown. Put out some science, talk about, air dispersion and why a mask works, and if you're in closed areas, and that if you're going to be in an enclosed area with someone for 8 hours, a mask doesn't really do it because the breathing it's going to get through, right? Like just things like that so they can understand, so that people aren't so just like, the only rule I know is mask, no mask, right? They don't understand like when they're applicable, and then people can make their own judgments in that. I just wish there was more trust in society to pick up on those things. I don't think people are as stupid as they're treating them right now, because I think and that's what really took me from a place of fear to a place of like still taking it seriously and being understanding with it, but take so much of that fear away, was just that knowledge and understanding about it and how it spreads and all these kind of things. I feel like that made me feel so much better about it, even though you still have to take pretty much the same precautions. It doesn't really change that much, but I feel like my own anxiety about everything was so much taken down as soon as I put that effort on my own to learn the stuff, because I wasn't getting it anywhere. But I don't know how you do that either, because that's a tough thing to roll out. But it just seems like we're spending money all these places that maybe we could throw a little bit of cash at that and understanding people talk about health and what nutrition to take and that kind of thing. But I don't know. Maybe we'll just leave it all to the nurses to pick up the pieces when everybody doesn't understand. You guys can fight the fight for us.
Yeah, nurses really love that.
Yeah, I bet.
That was one of the things that was frustrating at the beginning, is that they weren't graduating med students, they weren't graduating nursing students because of COVID, and there were lots of nursing students that wanted to get out there and start working and helping, and they couldn't.
Wow, that's so ridiculous.
Yeah.
Wow. Did they ever say like any reasoning behind that of why they were making that decision, or?
Well, I don't know. If I had to guess, I suspect that the universities didn't want to have any liability if
100%.
somebody got
That would
sick.
be my guess too. For sure it is. But I just feel like that exact sentence is the cause of so much of the rules. Like people, they're saying these rules are for this, but it's like, no, these rules are because you don't want to take liability. And that's fine. I fully support that. I don't think anybody should be forced to take liability, but I just want some honesty about it. Like, let's not pretend that's not the reason we're doing it. Let's be honest about it, and then I can accept that. But there's so much of people hiding behind that stuff and just saying like, no, this is just for your own good, even though it's just, well, we don't want to get in trouble. If somebody gets sick here, we're going to get sued, right? And I feel like so much of that comes from the U.S. because it's such a litigious, right? Like when I took B-law in school, they're talking about the first class, like what he said, like he's like, before we get into anything, we just got to understand the difference between Canada and America and what you can and can't sue for. Like, people get this idea of what you can and can't sue for from like Law and Order and stuff and all these American TV shows. And then, they go to lawyer in Canada, but can I sue? No, you can't sue for that. Like you need a pretty rock solid case. And I feel like that is and I think that's good. I definitely prefer Canada's way to America's way. I feel like when you get that litigious, it just throws so many wrenches into how things should work. But we need to take advantage of that. We don't have that risk of, people suing for all this stuff. People understand this is a pandemic. People are going to get sick. If you are opening these things up, they're doing it at their own risk, right? Like I feel like that the incentive that everybody's worried about, or the negative incentive that everybody's worried about with that liability, isn't as bad as people think. I feel like it's just that, but everyone sees everybody else doing it. Like they're not opening up because they're worried, so then I have to be worried about it. But I think if everybody just realized like, no, like we still have to be safe, we still have to be reasonable, but nobody's going to go around suing everybody. Just like all these tickets that are getting handed out, not a one of those is going to pass in court. Like I feel like it's so silly when it's like, oh, I got a $1,500 ticket. It's like, yeah, if they go fight that, that's so unconstitutional, it will never pass. And the courts are so backed up right now because of COVID. Like everything's getting thrown out right now. And it's just kind of silly to me that all this things are playing, all these incentives at play that are making people's decisions are actually totally phony, because like at the end of the day, there's no consequences to them because of what's going to happen later. But everybody's still acting as if that's what's going on. It's kind of funny to me.
Yeah, my sister, she just flew back from Glasgow.
Wow.
Because she did a term there.
Yeah.
Well, did a whole year there.
Wow, that'd be cool.
For her master's.
Yeah.
And coming back right now is just a nightmare, because you have to do that 3-day stay in a hotel or whatever, and you have to pay for it, and it's their hotels. And
I have very strong feelings on that. I feel like I've been very worked up about a lot of things happening, but when that one came in, like that is so backwards to me as a society that values freedom, that you can do that. Like, especially if people can show like, no, I have a plan. Like, this is what I'm doing. I'm not going to infect anybody. Like, I'm an adult. You don't need to treat me like a child and say like, I don't trust you to do the right thing. I'm going to put you in this hotel. And then to make people pay for it and all that stuff, and to use private security, like, oh, that just makes me feel icky. I read too many books like the Gulag Archipelago and all this stuff, and how revolutions start and where it all, and the small creep that it is, like that just makes me shiver, like to think about that stuff. Like, oh, it's just so, but then I don't want to sound like I'm this, because I feel like if you're not that, people just label you as this like oh, he doesn't believe in COVID and he thinks it's like, no, I'm somewhere in the middle. And I feel like so many people are in the middle of like, they do understand that, but they're so scared to say anything because they don't want to get labeled with that. And it's like, oh, well, I think there's more reason, but I feel like there's a lot of people making decisions that aren't like the adults in the room. I think there's people that are smart that could, add to this. I feel like we didn't realize how much lack of accountability had happened because there was nothing that pressed our systems, right? We haven't had a war. We haven't had a real serious thing in a long time. So all these accountability has gone on, all this bureaucracy arises, all these, this red tape and all this stuff that really gums things up, but you don't really know it until it's tested, and then you're tested and you see it all come out in the wash, and it's just like, oh man, we got to really value who we elect and who we give that kind of power. Because that's actually me and my dad were running this morning. I was talking about it. I just said, like, one of the biggest things is throughout this whole pandemic, it's given power to so many people, right? Like, there's so many people that didn't work for power, didn't do anything, has just been handed to them. And that's not a mark on them. I don't think that is saying that they're bad people or anything. Power is one of the hardest things to handle. My biggest example is me when I became an LDL exec. I didn't really like who I was, like some of it, but like I didn't do it very good with power. I had to learn a lot of lessons of who I am with power and what I use with it. And I feel like that learning was the biggest thing I could have done, right? Like, I feel like if I hadn't done that and I went right from business school to the role I'm in where I have employees and have power over people, I feel like I would not have had such a respect for that and value that power and not to overuse it, not to do it. If I hadn't had that experience, or I probably overstepped in Lister and was walking around like my shit didn't stink and like a fucking idiot, right? And to think back on it, it's funny now, right? Because you're 20, 21 years old and like, you don't know any better, but like, I just feel like so many people never got to have that experience to see like, oh, who am I with power? And then just get handed to it, right? Now they're responsible to tell people what they can and can't do. And it's kind of interesting to see how it shakes out, right? Like I think maybe 50 years ago when this happened, life was so hard that people kind of learn those lessons and they learn the respect of what power is and how to work for it. But now life is pretty easy for the most part. And there's a lot of people that this is their first taste of hardship, right? It's kind of interesting. I don't know. It's funny to see how it all works out.
Yeah, totally. I got really lucky where I didn't really have to think that much about COVID between basically March when I went home and January when I got to Edmonton. It just wasn't a thing.
Because you were out at the farm.
Yeah, I live out on the farm. Oh. We never saw anybody.
Did any of the cows get COVID?
We don't think so.
There's a couple questionable ones. One really lost his taste and smell, and we don't know. So we'll have to see.
They just stopped eating.
Yeah. We're still waiting on the results. AHS is pretty slow. Or I guess, what is the BC one?
Actually,
BCHS?
don't know.
I don't know.
I don't think so, but I don't know what it is.
I don't know. Who cares? It's BC.
Yeah. Well,
I'm just kidding. Oh man, that's funny. But speaking of Lister, that was so that's where I got to meet you. And even first year, we didn't really know each other because I was in Kelsey, you were in Henday, we were mortal enemies, right? And you'd look across the tower once in a while or out at Duke's and you'd maybe look at people, but you didn't interact that much. And then second year, we ended up living one floor apart, and then our floors were paired for dodgeball, and we had quite the squad that year, and we had a lot of fun. I'm curious, you were pretty good at dodgeball, and I'm curious, did you play sports before, like growing up, like in high school and stuff?
I did cross-country running, track, basketball. I played rugby a couple of years, actually. Yeah? And that's it, I think.
I feel like you always have to ask that because, like, I feel like when I first came in, I assumed everybody that's good must have played sports. But dodgeball, the way that dodgeball is set up, you didn't have to be real athletic. Like that's what made it so cool. It allowed all these people that just, had that narrative in their head, like, oh, I'm not athletic. I don't play sports. These people that have never even given it a try. It was so much fun and so much camaraderie around it. And it was so low stakes, like, especially at the start of the year when everyone's just learning and stuff. Like, it doesn't matter if you suck. Everybody sucks. Like, it's fine. And it allows them the freedom to try. And sometimes when you suck, you're the funniest person out there and everyone loves to watch it because you're that person, right? Like, it really creates that atmosphere. But I had to get better at asking that question, like, oh, did you play sports? Because so many of the best players we saw hadn't done a lick of anything, right? And that was kind of cool. And I feel like you could almost tell that too when somebody had never had that experience of the adulation of sport, because I feel like that is its own thing in itself, and it's almost a power, right? And you could see in Lister, some people did well with that power, some people didn't, right? Like the Carter Corrigans of the world, where he was the best player in school, everyone looked up to, every girl wanted him, right? Like it was nuts, but he didn't give a fuck about it, like he was so much fun, like, right? Like if he face shotted a girl on the other side and blew her nose off, right? Like he didn't care about the game. He would step over the line, like take himself out and go check on them, right? Like that was what was so nice, and you could see that. But he was one of those ones that played sports all the time and had that. But then you see those kids where this is the first taste of it. Maybe they come back, they come back for it, and they're big wheel on campus, kind of like me when I became an exec, right? And you walk around and it's again, we're all kids and nobody knows better at that time, but it's funny now to look back on it and to see all that, because when you're in it, you don't see any of that. You just, this is the dynamics. These are the people you're too close to it to be able to see. But now a couple of years removed, to look back on it, it's like, oh yeah, that person, I'm sure like, oh, they probably never played sport. Like I can see that. And they got a little bit of taste of it and they kind of flaunted it over people or used it to get all the girls they could or whatever it was. It was quite the experience.
Yeah, you don't have to be terribly coordinated to move out of the way of ball.
Exactly.
Like, and catching a ball, yeah, you have to be coordinated. Or even hitting a ball, totally.
Yeah.
Get like flopping on the ground out of the way, not hard.
Exactly. And that's what I loved about the rule set. It was like, because high school dodgeball, if you catch, the other person's out. So it's catching is such an advantage. But like how the rule set was set up, if you catch it, you're not out. Like it just saves you, but they're not out. Nobody comes in. So it really devalues. If you're going to take the risk of trying to catch a ball, you're better off just getting out of the way, unless it's the last resort. So that's what it turned catching. There were some people that were really good at catching, and if it was anywhere within a radius where they could catch it, they would. But for most people, it's just like, it's disincentivized to try and catch. So it brings it back and it really evens the playing field, right? And that was what was, I think there's a couple rules like that I really stick out to me. And that was my favorite of like the rules of like changing it. What is the rule and all that stuff. And I just feel like that rule set was so magical. I've asked a couple people that come on the podcast that have been from Lister, like if they think it was, do they think it was the rule set that made it such a fun game and so special, and like it really transcended what it was? Like a bunch of people throwing dodgeballs, but to anybody that was there, it was more than that. And it's hard to explain to people what it was. Or was it just the fact that we had any sport that you could have the camaraderie of a floor and a family and the competition of it? Like I'm always trying to separate those two, and I feel like it's got to be a bit of both, but just the magic that was. And now looking at it this year with COVID, and then how is it going to come back? And it seemed like the league was getting a little bit less numbers in our later years. Like I just hope that never goes away, right?
Yeah, totally. And I agree. I think it's a bit of both, where you can be anybody in play. Yeah. And then it's also something that you do with your whole floor. So it's a bonding thing. It gets you actually out of your room and doing something. So yeah, definitely a bit of both.
And also to have like a weekly event where you're active was and that was that fun that would bring you out, because like I always wanted to stay active when I was in Lister, but sometimes you just get overwhelmed with school and overwhelmed with all this stuff, and you have tests and you have midterms, and like, even if I wanted to, I can't. Like in your own head, I'm sure you can always make time for stuff, right? It's almost silly to say now with the experience that I have to look back on it. But in that time, it felt like I don't have an hour to go to the gym, but everybody's going to dodgeball. I can schedule it around. It's so much fun that it's not only is it exercise, but it's also like stress relief and all this stuff. Like it really kept people active. Like I definitely gained the freshman 15 while I was there, and probably a couple more than that. But I just think like, imagine if I didn't have dodgeball that was keeping me somewhat active, and I wasn't just, drinking every night and doing nothing at all. Like that's I think it serves so much. And I feel like that's what always chapped me, was how much disrespect it got from the university, and how much they didn't realize what they had there and how much value that was bringing, and how, amazing that place was. And they just, with all these rules that they put in, and you were a LHSA exec, hey?
Yes. Yeah. I was, I took over for Maggie.
Oh, right.
After Scott got canceled and she got evicted. And
so you were an exec when, Sam, thank you. Oh my God, what an asshole. He's been on the pod. We talked for like 3 hours. We crushed beers. Oh, I'm an asshole. Anyway, I do that all the time. So you were an exec when Sam was. I was thinking, in my head for some reason, I was thinking it was when T was the president. So you got the full fun of those meetings and court cases and all that? Yeah,
I was one of the people who testified.
Wow.
Yep.
In the University Kangaroo Court.
I was.
Yeah. Oh man, that was the other piece that pissed me off. It was like, so our case is pretty strong. Like we're in the right here. Let's go to real court. And they said, no, you can't do that. You have to come to this university court. I was like, well, why? Like, why do you get to decide where we where we fight this battle? Like, it was such bullshit to me. So how was that experience?
Oh man.
How was that? Do you want to give me the full rundown? Because I remember that time, but I was an LDL exec, and I got to be in all the meetings with you guys, like the exec meetings and stuff, and got to talk about the strategy. But then when you guys would go off to the court cases, it wasn't my circus, wasn't my monkey, so I didn't get to go, but I was so invested that I just got the outside. But I don't think I ever got to hear from anybody the real stories. Maybe me and Sam talked about it a bit, but
Yeah, so it was very awkward because do you remember our changeover dance where we were doing all of those sexual moves?
Oh, yeah. Classic Lister.
It was so fun.
Yeah.
Like I did a handstand into Pat's arms and then he spit in between my legs. Like this is the move that we did.
Oh, I remember that so well.
Imagine a lawyer asking you about that.
Oh my God.
And
what kind of language did they use? I hope they kept a record. Oh my God, I wonder if we can find that record. I wonder if they had like a stenographer or something.
I don't remember.
Oh, that is so funny.
It was.
And I feel, but you're the perfect person for that because I feel like if anybody's going to go up there and like deal with that embarrassment, I feel like you are just bulletproof. Like you could go and deal with that.
I almost laughed, but I didn't.
Yeah.
I was so close to laughing.
I bet you if like somebody like me was there that could have made eye contact with, it would have been over. You would have been started laughing right there.
Yeah, probably. But it was T, luckily, and he like had this rock solid face.
Yeah. T was in lock-in mode. Yeah. No. And I look back, it was funny to have that conversation with Sam and to realize, you listened to that episode, Hey, Me and Sam.
Yeah.
I forgot so much of that. Like, it's not that many years ago, really, but like I had forgotten so many of those points and so much of that. And it was funny how much of the emotions came back right there of like when he was talking about like Trent and what all the stuff that they did. And that brings it back as like one of my best friends, Fraser. And he told the story on the podcast of how he got kicked out of Lister for absolutely nothing. And then how he called the university or called the football coach to get him kicked off the team too. Like, just thinking about that, I get visibly angry, right? And like people always, like talk about because, I love my time at Lister and I love so much of that, but some of the things that the university did, I have so much mixed feelings there. And I feel like the biggest one to me is like, I will never be able to get over those bad feelings until there's a actual like written apology to Fraser Oliver for that. Cause he's the nicest kid, like absolute heart of gold, like never hurt a fly, great kid, and how he got fucking railroaded there, like, and a million people. I mean, we could tell that story, Arth and all these people that had a very similar story to that, but just that one that personally affected me. I'm just such a loyal guy that like to the death, like they're dead to me until that happens. But it's just it's sad to think about. Like that's my little story with Fraser, but there was so many of those shows, so many kids that. And there were kids at the time. That's what me and Sam kept saying. Like, man, you felt like an adult at the time. You've moved out and you're there, but you're like 20 years old. You don't know anything. And there's these real adults that have all this power over you, right? Like with all the talk of power dynamics right now and the effect that has. Like, where was the power dynamics back then when they were absolutely, just walking us all around, telling us what we could and couldn't do, and we were responsible to try and defend ourselves within their rules, right? And they could change those rules at any time. And it was just not a fun experience. So how was that on you to balance your schoolwork and all this other stuff, your LHSAID stuff, and then this battle with the university? How was that on you personally?
It was awful.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, I did really bad in school the year that I was a VP, and even the year after that when I was still going through all of those court cases.
Yeah.
Court cases.
Yeah, kangaroo court.
Really.
That's what I call it. Yeah, university court. Those fuckers.
And that took a long time.
Yeah. Like your workload in university, regardless, like with all the stuff, like just trying to fit an hour dodgeball game in is tough. Now you have court case you got to do in the prep and just the emotional drag. I remember those meetings where we'd have the whole exec and some of the tears and the stories and stuff that came out in that room. Like it was just so emotionally draining too, not just like the time sink that it was, but the emotional time sink. Like, oh man, I can't imagine. And like I said, I was kind of in and out because I would help when I could, but I was LDL girl, right? Like I was told to run that. And that was the first thing they said as soon as this all started was you guys separate yourself as much as you can because if we don't make it out of this, we don't want the LDL to go down as well. Right. Yeah. It was,
yeah, that was a really tough year because I took over being VP, but then also lost. I think it was 4
FCs. Yeah, floor coordinators. Yeah,
because I also had to move up, so I was supposed to replace my FC, but nobody wanted to do it on our floor.
Yeah.
So I also did that, and then
right, you were the exec and the FC of 8 Henday. Wow.
Yeah, and it isn't like you're just losing staff members. These people are like
your family.
Your family. They're your best friends. You spend all the time with them.
Like planning skulk and stuff.
Yeah. And then they're just gone and they're not allowed to come to where you live.
Yeah, they're hell listed. They're not even allowed to come and play dodge. They're not even allowed to come see their friends. They are hell listed from that building. They cannot go in, right? And like, And also, it's not even that you lost them, but then the way that you lost them too, and how much bullshit it was, and what an overstep, and like just what a witch hunt it was. Like it was so. And what bugged me about it, I think I talked about this on Sam, was to everybody outside of that bubble, the perspective, I think the optics of what it looked like, it just looked like a bunch of kids that were bitching, right? That were just. But when you really, if you would listen to these kids, which happened a couple times, there's so many parents that were lawyers of these kids that would explain the whole situation and say, like, take this to real court. Like this is bullshit what the university's doing. Like if you take this to a real court, you will win. But they just wouldn't allow that. They wanted nothing to do with it, right? Like it was just so sad to watch. It was kind of one of those things. But also on the bright side of it too, I feel like that was a really great learning for all those people that went through that, of how the real world works and how things aren't fair and how these games are played, right? I feel like that is something usually people learn when they go into the real world, into the work world, into the corporate world, right? That's kind of unfortunately how things work. And it's a little bit of a taste of that, right? And I feel like it sucked that we had to go through it, but also probably prepared every one of us that came out of it, right? Like, and it's cool to think of like Sam and T and yourself and all these people that went through that. And now to look what they're doing now is like, when we talk about, pressure forging diamonds, or like the hardship making you grow, like they're now doing all these cool things that it probably wasn't some part to it. I'm sure they want a better way for them to learn those lessons and a little bit less painful, but it's at least a silver lining on it, the way I see it. And I'm just excited to look at all these people like Yelena and all of them, like, and just see the cool things they're doing now. It's like, yeah, I could have saw that. Like I can see what forged that and now what they're doing. Like it's almost like we went through so much that the real world didn't know what hit them when those kids came out. Right? They think, oh, this is university. And what have they seen? And then they come out and they're just, I don't know, ripping through walls and that kind of thing. But it was still a fun time though. Like even looking back with all of that, like the amount of fun we had considering that, even during that, like even during those weeks, like we'd go out and we'd commiserate and we'd, head to Duke's and drown our sorrows. And we had the funnest time. Like, it's so funny. It's almost hard to explain to people like what we went through, because there's also this really good part of it, right? And it's like, man, I thought when you talked about Lister, it was an amazing experience. Like, I've never heard you say a bad thing. It's like, yeah, but you've missed like these other parts that happen with it. It's quite interesting to try and explain to people now. Hey.
Yeah, I don't even try.
No, me neither. Yeah. Well, until this podcast, right? Like, never tried to explain what dodgeball was. Never tried to explain, like, yeah, the LHSA battles, what the LHSA is. But now you come on here. But it's fun too, because when I did that episode with Sam, it was fun. It was interesting to see people reach out and say, "Oh man, I forgot all about that." Like people that were close to it or just peripherally saw it, or because everybody went through it at the university. Like everybody was fighting, everyone that was in Lister at that point, but there's only a core group of people that actually was inside of it and fighting for it and seeing what was happening. It wasn't just getting the at the floor meetings at the end of the week, kind of their little update from their FC of what was going on with it, right? Like I'm sure there's a lot of people that felt passionately, and there's a lot of people that helped fight and protests or whatever they did and added their voice to ours, but there was only a couple people that really got to see the real brunt of it. And that was the biggest thing for me, was seeing all the emotion in those rooms of those executive meetings of what you're putting these kids through. Like, it blows my mind that the university could let that happen, right? And that they still there's never issued an apology. They never had nothing. I don't know. I'm hoping maybe one day it'll happen. You don't think so? You're shaking your head? Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it might. I feel like universities themselves are on such shaky legs right now, especially with COVID. But I think this was happening before COVID. I think there's just over the years so much bureaucracy and so much admin costs and bloat that happened in these universities that they were just destined to fail. Right now, this is really pushing that envelope. But I think they're going to have to come to terms with the mistakes that were made and really shake things up and apologize for some stuff and set a course to do better. But maybe I'm just an optimist forever, because I think
you're just being optimistic.
Well, maybe I
There's
am.
probably not even a single person that still works in Lister that was even there when we were.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like when I had that talk with Sam, I was thinking like I would love to have somebody on from the other side, somebody from the university to come chat about it and say like, what were you guys seeing, right? Like, because like we said, the optics from the outside world was that, oh, these are just these kids complaining, right, throwing a fit. But they don't get that excuse at the university, because we sat in those rooms, right? Like I think Sam said it perfectly, right? Like he said, like he would have one-on-one meetings with these people that were making these decision making and say like you guys can see this isn't fair. And they're like, well, too bad, right? Like, and they'd say like, figure it out. It doesn't matter. We have the power. We don't have to listen to you, right? And it's like, well, then clearly you don't have the excuse just to say you didn't understand what it was or you didn't have a full, like we had cases about it, right? And not to say that they didn't have some legs to stand on too. I mean, some of it was probably inappropriate, but like, also, is inappropriate that bad? Like, I know you've got to create a safe space, I guess, in a certain sense, but like for all the people that were doing it, like everybody on that Henday Hall Council that was doing all those dances and stuff, you guys are all fine with it. You guys are best friends. You have you could see it on your faces when you're doing that. It was the funniest thing that you got to do all year, and you guys were excited for it. And like, who are they to tell you that you were harmed by that? Like, that is just so silly to me, and so par for the course for all the infantilization, right? Like you see that with the COVID, like we talked about, like everyone treating people like kids. It's exactly what happened. They treated us like, and we were kids, let's be fair, but treating us like little kids, I guess, like 6-year-olds, right? And it was frustrating to see, but like I said, I think we came out of it a little bit stronger, hopefully.
I hope so.
Yeah. They couldn't take down the Queen of Henday, hey? How did that all start? I feel like I came into that afterwards.
I cannot remember anymore. I'll think about it.
Yeah. Did you enjoy that moniker?
Oh,
or was it more annoying of us all just yelling it at you?
It was pretty annoying for a long time. And then I was just like, well, whatever.
I'll take it. Yeah. I'll start walking with my crown on through the halls. Oh, that's funny. What's some of your favorite memories from Lister? Like, was it like the Skulks planning those, or was it dodgeball? What do you look back on?
Now that I think about, going back to how the Queen started, I think it happened when I took over VP Henday.
Oh, maybe. I thought it was earlier than that.
No, it was. You're right. Because I remember. It was my dodgeball nickname.
Right.
And that was at the beginning of the year. Yeah. I think it happened because I won Rookie of the Year and people were making fun of me.
Right. And I think, yeah, because I remember one of the first times I met you that it must have been second year if it was the start. We're sitting in the calf back when it was by the windows in the back, and it was with a bunch of Henday people. I think I might have just had a class with a couple of them because I didn't really know that many Hendays at that point. And you came over and they all just stood up, and this is the first time I heard that they all stood up and like moved all their stuff and got to sit. And, oh, the Queen of Henday's coming in. I was like, what is going on here? Who is this Queen of Henday? Like this Jenn Meyer. Oh man. Fun times. Yeah, that is my first recollection of meeting you before that. And it was quite the introduction, I'd say.
Oh God.
Good times. There's always it was never a shortage of a joke. Like there was always jokes going on, inside jokes, outside jokes, ridiculous things. And you would just see the wildest stuff happen that was clearly some other tower's inside joke. Like a storm of Mac kids in diapers would come run through. And what is happening there? Like I have no idea what those kids do, but they look like they're having the funnest time, right? And we have our own version of that, whatever it was. It was just such a cool place. I don't know how. I often think about outside of university, how could you recreate what we had there? But it's almost, when are you going to get that many young people together for a purpose to grow like that and to learn from each other, right? Like it's like the socialization of high school on steroids because you live together, right? But those are still the same lessons you learned. I still stand by. I learned way more living in Lister and just how to be around people and how to operate than I learned in the classroom those 4 years, right? And I feel like if I would have bought an apartment and stayed there and just went to class, I would have got absolutely nothing. I probably would have dropped out, I think. I don't think I would have been allowed to drop out. I think my parents would kill me if I would have. I don't, that was the only reason you saw me. I didn't go to any classes, but I never failed a class because I knew if I failed a class, I'd be in big trouble. But that was my polls. How little of work can I put in? How many classes can I skip without ever failing a class? And that really tested me. And I feel like that is more what I learned of just how to scam the system, how to do that, right? And I feel like those lessons are almost better than the lessons you were how can I get away with it? And obviously there were some classes that were interesting that I enjoyed and I would go to those, but they were very few between, I think, especially in the later years where my degree was just all high level economics. And it's just these crazy formulas that have nothing to do with anything I'm ever going to learn. I was like, this is painful. This is not what I thought business school would be. I don't know when I'm going to learn this, but then you have a class like B-Law, which was super interesting and I loved it and I would listen, right? But then you have all these boring classes that have nothing to do with it. I don't know. How was that for your first degree? Was it some classes were interesting and the majority of them were like that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I very quickly differentiated between the classes that I needed to go to and the classes that I would never go to except for the midterm and the final. Yeah. And that's it. And there were some classes that I obviously enjoyed, but for the most part I really didn't like my degree, which is why I didn't want to do masters or any research or anything like that. So I knew that I didn't want to be in school anymore.
Yeah.
Probably by my third year. I did my degree in 5 years. By my third year, I knew I didn't want to be in school anymore, but I didn't want to finish 3 years of school and have nothing to show for
You're in
it.
too far
So
at that point, hey?
I just was like, get me any degree.
Yeah.
Get me out of here.
Yeah. And,
so I can figure out what I want to do.
and now that it's something that you've decided that you want to do and that you're interested, is the schooling a lot different? Do you find that it's a lot more different of experience now that it's something that you're actively trying to do?
Oh yeah.
Yeah?
I enjoy, I'm not going to say all of my classes. I enjoy parts of all of my classes.
Yeah.
So it makes it a lot easier to go and to pay attention and to talk to other people that are in my classes about the content.
Yeah.
And I just am learning so much more and so much better. And I'm going to be reasonably competent when I graduate.
That's all we ask. That's all we ask everyone else in Alberta. Do you know where you want to work when you're done? Do you think you'll work in Alberta, or do you think you go back to BC? Long time away. You don't have to answer that. I don't even know if you thought about it.
What are you doing to me?
No, I didn't even ask it. Pretend I didn't ask it.
I don't know what I want to do.
Yeah.
It depends on what happens in the next year and a half.
Yeah.
Maybe I find something that I really like doing here, like a job, or
find a specialization that might take you somewhere, or what you said, one of those add-ons that you could do. So then how does one learn what is all out there? Like, is that part of the schooling too, to let you know like what all your options are? Do you kind of have to, is that more on you to figure out?
To an extent, there is instruction on what there is to do out there, but not a lot.
Oh, yeah.
You have to sort of take it into your own hands to decide what sorts of things you like doing.
What interests you?
Yeah. So like in our clinicals, you pay attention to the things that you like doing and the things that maybe you don't want to do so much.
What are those for you? So I know it's early, but what are the things that you like to do and what are the things maybe you don't like to do?
I don't particularly care for cleaning up patients that much.
Fair enough. Can't blame you there.
It's not my favorite thing. The problem with that is that I really like old people and that sort of comes with it. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's a catch-22.
Yeah.
Hey? Oh, well, maybe there'll be some specialization where it's still with old people, but in a way where you don't have to clean up as much shit.
Yeah.
But
So
I don't know if that exists. You might have to invent it. You might have to blaze a trail. I'm trying to envision a way that you could do it.
I don't know. I think I'm just going to have to suck it up or find something else to do. I don't know.
Yeah, it's funny to talk about that of like how much like being ready to get out of school, and like same with me. Like when I was finally on the way out, and like I was very disenfranchised with school, especially because in business school it was very much there's a narrative that you have to follow. If you step outside of that, even if you're still correct, you're going to get marked wrong, right? Like if you don't follow that, oil and gas is evil. Even though I was in a natural resources and environment degree, I thought it'd be more natural resources, less environment. It's pretty much I'm an environmentalist, everybody. Like that is what I learned in school. And don't get me wrong, some of that was interesting and probably really changed my value and brought me from maybe my slave like oil and gas roots to maybe a more balanced point in the middle now, right? Because it centered me out. But I was just so frustrated that you couldn't even try and show like a little bit of like, hey, like that is also true. You need to value it, but there's also this, right? There was none of that. If you tried that, you were getting marked wrong. So I was so ready to get out of there. But now when I think about it, like if someday I'm in Edmonton and I'm, doing the podcast full time and I have a studio and all this, like I would love to go take a couple courses on like philosophy or something I love at the university and just go do that, because now it's a class that I chose this class, right? Like I don't know if I'd ever go back for a full degree, but something like that, or, artificial intelligence or something that really hooks or more like, because I love science, but I went into business, so I never got to take the only science I got to take was the psych classes that were my science credits for the undergrad to get into, and I loved it. I love psychology. I loved all that stuff, right? Like, but I never really got to do it, and I feel like that's why my experience was so different, because I wasn't really chasing my interests. I was just trying to get this business degree, right? And I picked the title that seemed more in line with my interests, which was natural resources, energy, and environment. I didn't realize that the natural resources and energy part would be like 5% and environment would be 95, but it was a new degree. I think they only brought it in like 2 years before I got there, maybe even a year before I got there. So I didn't know I was getting it. But now to think back on that, like I can see me walking back from my point of, I will never step foot in a lecture hall again. Like now, maybe there's a middle ground, right? Definitely wouldn't do it right now with COVID, just because it's just not the same. You
can't go to school.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I don't think I'd ever sit. If it was an online class, it just wouldn't be the same. I wouldn't want to do it, right? Like I feel like, especially if it's something like philosophy, where I want to be able to raise my hand and question these things, right? And like put my hand, which I never did in school, right? Maybe some of the classes I would, but I was always just like, how can I get out of this? I don't want to interact like as little interact. For some classes, I definitely realized that I need to do the interaction. My first year, one of my English courses, we had a beautiful Irish teacher and she loved me. I didn't read one of the books, but I would always just throw my hand up and just say something really eloquent nonsense about like what somebody else was talking about. Like if they were talking about the book, as soon as I got a piece where like, oh, I can make a point on that like I hope makes sense in the context of the whole book because I didn't read it. And she loved me. I got such good grades in that class, didn't read a book. It was amazing. But that was one of those times, like you talk about, like, how can I game this class? But that's what I learned in that class. That's what I needed. And it was awesome. It was one of my favorite classes. I even still go to that class because I knew I had to and I could get away. I would rather show up to that class instead of skipping it. But if I skip it now, I'm going to actually have to read the book. So if I show up to the class, pull in as much information as I can on it and read the Spark Notes or whatever those things are called online. Those saved my life so many times through university. If anybody's entering university, you got to learn that. Cole's Notes, Spark Notes, that is the bread and butter. Like, I wouldn't even buy textbooks for my classes in the last couple of years. I just, if I'm really failing and it's coming up to midterm, like I'm really struggling in this class, I might go buy the textbook, but I'm not going to go spend $100 on a book that the teacher wrote, right? And they get a kickback on it. Like, so much of the university experience was just me going like, ugh, like this is so awful. Like, I do not like any of the surroundingness. Like, I like small pieces of this, but there's so much ickiness that was so plain, like they weren't even trying to cover it up, right? And I feel like that is what is it eventually going to make them have to come to terms, and there's going to be some sort of educational reform or revolution here in the next couple of years, couple decades. I hope it's sooner. I'm hoping it's years. I hope it doesn't take any longer, but like stuff like that. I just feel like there's no, the projected path, like on the path they're on, it's just going to keep getting more bloat, more admin costs and all that. And there's going to have to be some breaking point where they realize, because people are getting out of it with these degrees like we talk about, and they think, I'm going to have all this job and it's not the same. Now that's going to change people's expectations of what they're going to get out of the university. If they want to still attract people and have people take them seriously, they're going to have to adapt. I just don't know. I think it might be some universities do, some universities don't. I don't know. It seems like there's some universities in the States, like the University of Chicago is really adapting and changing, right? And there's ones here and there, but I don't know. Maybe it'll just take those universities that are changing, if they'll show success, and maybe they'll see that and be, oh, well, maybe we got to kind of jump on board with what they're doing. Again, I'm as pessimistic as I am on this podcast sometimes. Deep down, I am an optimist. I always try and think that things are going to get better.
Things are going to get better.
I just have such a belief in humans, and I feel like the potential. I feel like just with life getting so easy, we don't really have to try. We don't have to really see what our potential is, right? Like, human potential is limitless. So that's what I said at the very start of the pandemic. I said, this is scary, but we haven't seen nothing yet. You don't want to see the height of what, if people are really, push comes to shove, we got to figure this out. Like, we can do amazing things as humans, right? Like, I just have so much faith in that it maybe covers up for some of the other stuff of, that points to the other thing of maybe the weaker points of society and people and our failings. But I just like to ignore those maybe a little bit or keep cognizant of them, but really think about the positives of that, right? And I feel like that's just what gets me through, because I think if I didn't, I would just spiral on all the negativity, because I feel like for whatever reason, I was always very observant of that, and I could see all these patterns and all that. And I feel like when you have that, you can, I think at a young age, I probably realized, I don't remember this, but I'm just kind of guessing and maybe talking off the top of my head, but I would imagine if you see that, you kind of have the opportunity, you can see all the patterns. If you focus on the bad patterns, you can go down a different path. But if you just, I think it's a choice. You have to focus on the good ones and hope that, or else you're going to go crazy, right? Like, it's interesting.
Oh, absolutely. I did read about this recently, where women that know and think about sexism are less happy than people that don't realize about it, that it's there and are not affected by it.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of similar.
And it is. I think it's really similar. And I think you can plug sexism in for a whole bunch of things. But I think what's happening now is people are really lost for identity lately. So they find their identity in things like that, in fighting sexism, which is a noble goal. And that's why this works so well, why it's so prevalent, because that's an amazing goal. That is something that is something you should be looking up to. But you have to understand that if you make your entire identity looking for racism, looking for sexism, looking for anything, you're going to find it everywhere. And if you run out of things to find, you're going to invent them. And now you're just in a place where you're just bringing yourself down, where your goal, you're never going to reach your goal, because you're going to just, even if you are making progress, you're going to ignore that, because now you don't have a job or you don't have an identity if these things start to be solved. So it seems obvious to people on the outside that can see some of it, but once you're inside of it, just like Lister, right? Like that was something that I was very interested in. Ow, hamstring cramp. The worst. Oh, my hammy. I'll be fine. I won't be fine. I'm not fine, Jen. I'm not fine. Oh.
I don't know how to help you.
You're a nurse. How can you not help me? What was I talking about? I hurt, Jen. I hurt. What was I saying?
Stand up.
What was I saying?
I don't remember.
I lost it
you
all.
started yelling.
Oh, yeah. Also, I didn't even scare you. It's a good thing you're not wearing headphones. I would have just yelled in your ears. Oh, man. I think, you know what it is? I haven't rode a bike in like 10 years, and those electric bikes, we took them for a rip yesterday, and I wanted to test out the full capabilities of this bike, so I cranked up to the highest gear so that with the full power of the bike itself and me pedaling, I just wanted to see how fast I could get the thing going the whole time. So for half an hour.
How fast you go?
I got going 50, but it was down a dirt road and it was a little squirrely and it got a little loose gravel. I was like, this is not, I looked down, saw 50 and then realized what a poor decision I had made. And I was like, this is not smart. I don't need to be here right now. But now my legs are so sore because I was running with my dad this morning and I run all the time. Like, not breathing. Why am I so sore? Like I pulled my groin. Like I'm like, oh, I'm just a bag of shit. And I just realized, oh yeah, I biked for the first time. My body just doesn't remember how to ride a bike. It's not used to it. But yeah, I think I was talking about the unfortunateness of the trap that people find themselves caught in when they're advocating for something, right? And I feel like that doesn't mean that you shouldn't advocate, but you have to be aware of that and you have to make sure that you are, because you start to devalue your own cause. If you start to find things that aren't there, right? Like if you're looking for sexism everywhere and you start finding things that are pushing it a little bit, like now you're inventing like, oh, like we're going after Aunt Jemima now. It hurts your cause because now people that are on the other side go, well, what are these people doing? But now that devalues the real work that needs to be done because there is sexism, there is racism, those things are out there. But if you start and I think everybody wants an easy way out because they want to stop racism, but they don't want to do the real thing. They don't want to look at redlining and all these real systemic racism things that aren't true because that's hard. They go, well, let's go after Aunt Jemima. That's easy. It's right there. I can just go on Twitter and start a thing. Like I don't have to put much work in. And now people on the outside just think like, oh, what are these people after? Like because they think if these people that are on the forefront of fighting it, they should be fighting the most important things. And if this is the most important thing, this silly thing that nobody really cares about, well, then there must not be, we must be done, right? And it sends the wrong message. And that's my thing. It's like, I am such an ally of all these things. I want change. Like I do, but I want it done the right way. And I feel like so much right now, it's doing more harm than good. And to try and explain that to somebody that has their whole identity wrapped around, it's really hard to break through that of just like, I support you and what you're going for. I just think you could be doing it better. And I think there's better ways you could go about it that maybe would help more and B, not harm what your cause is, right? Like but again, it seems obvious, but it's hard to explain to people. They just get so wrapped up in it.
Yeah, well, change also takes a long time and people are impatient. Mm-hmm.
You're right.
So I can see how you would get frustrated when things are not moving at the pace that you'd like it to go. Right. But that's the way people change. Yeah,
and that's the way I've explained to people is like it's like fighting these things that we don't want, right? It's a path and we're on the right trajectory. We're getting better. We're moving up, right? Like this curve, but there's times where it's getting better really quickly. Like, when we're fighting for civil rights in the 60s, right? Like that was huge steps all at once that were happening. Like they were gaining these things and then those happened at that point. Now it's slowed down a little bit, but I feel like so many people are so frustrated with the curve and how fast things are getting better that they do work that is actually pulling it down and stopping it from getting better. And that's where I get so frustrated. It's like, oh man, like I can see, because I feel like I have a foot in both worlds. I went to university. I did the whole Lister experience, right? The learned what words I can't say, and was, after my first year, I went back to Slave Lake and I was that word Nazi telling everyone, no, you can't say that. You can't say that. You can't say that. I was that guy. I was fully indoctrinated all in, right? And then in second year, when I went and I was an LDL exec and I got disenfranchised with the university and some of the things we see, and I kind of took a step back and was like, what is going on here? And I started to see it. And it was like, oh man. But now I can recognize both and I can see. But then now when I go back home to Slave Lake, or I just am friends with more people that don't understand some of those things and just see it from the outside, I can see them getting frustrated. Like, what are these people fighting for? Like these people are ridiculous. And it's like, no, they're not. They have a good goal in mind. They're just going about it the wrong way. And it's like, I wish I could bring both sides together because I feel like I can see it, but it's just, and that's what I hope to do with this podcast, is to talk about it like this and show both sides of it. And then people, if they're listening, maybe they can realize that, oh yeah, like those liberal snowflakes, they have a little bit of a point, right? Like they're not evil people. They're not bad people at all. They've just been in this structure and they've seen these incentives and this is how we fix the problem that they want to fix, right? Like that's been laid out for them. It doesn't mean they're a bad person, right? And then on the other side, people that work in oil and gas, they're not evil. They don't want to kill the world. Like it's so, again, so obvious to me, but it seems like as soon as it gets onto social media, all those things fall apart and we all forget that we're all humans at the end of the day and we just want to throw stones. I don't know. It's me getting off my optimistic side and back onto my pessimistic side, I guess. But
yeah, totally. But like, there's a difference between calling somebody crazy and that being bad and uninclusive, and respecting somebody's like gender pronouns.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, exactly. So if you say you can't say crazy, or you can't, like some of the words that was like, yeah, but
that's bananas.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like it's, but you're so right. Like there is about like, and that's the thing, but that's where I feel like you're pushing so far that I think people would not have that big of a deal respecting pronouns to a degree. Right. And they'll learn a little bit. And again, that's where change happens slowly.
Yeah.
You're also expecting people to change in 2 years, exactly how they understand the whole identity of who people can be and what people want to be called. Like, you're also setting your expectations in a little bit of a rough spot, but you're right. I think by saying, "Oh, you can't say crazy," I can't say crazy. Like that's a word. That's like a real staple word of our society. Like I need to. Well,
shoot. I liked crazy.
I know, right? Like, but now that makes people standoffish to any of the change word, because now they associate that with these people that just don't want to let us say crazy, right? Like there was a bunch of that, and that's where I think I saw it was in Lister with them saying like, you can't say this and you can't say that, and you can't. Oh, there were some of them. Some of the ones that were ableist I found were the worst ones. Like you can't say like, oh man, I got crippled drunk last night. And I was like, yeah, I can see that, but like, I don't think if somebody has one arm and say, "Oh, I got crippled drunk," they're gonna like clutch their pearls. You know what I mean? Like it's like that's a bit of a jump, right? But now somebody hears that and they go, "I can't say crippled drunk anymore." I really like that. Was my favorite one. Right now, they don't want to get on board with anything else. I don't know. Maybe I should find a better word for that. I feel like I still have my instincts of Lister. Anytime I say any of those words, I clam up a little bit, which is good. I feel like that was something just like me getting all that environmentalism stuff kind of pulled me back to the more normal. I feel like finding out all these words I shouldn't say and then finding my middle ground of which ones I want to take, because my vocabulary changed immensely when I went to Lister, right? Like I was who needed that training for sure, right? Like I needed those things and it was good. I think they pushed it too far and we're a little bit crazy with it. No, I wasn't even trying to make a joke. It's just the one that comes out. But, like that was, it was good. It brought me to a better place where now there's a whole slew of words I don't use, but there's a whole slew of words that we weren't supposed to use by Lister standards that I still use, right? And it's just finding that. But I feel like if that was what we started with, of just like, there's a whole bunch of language that can offend people. There's a couple of real bad ones we need to work on right now. And maybe once we get those ones kind of filter out and you don't hear it, it's because we've seen, I'm sure there's words that we can think about where we heard a whole bunch more when we were kids and we don't hear it as much, right? And it's slow, but it works. And then work on those. If there's still ones that are really bad, we'll work on those ones next. But just to try and get everyone to change everything all at once is just so harmful to the cause in general that I think, but I think people know that too. That's what frustrates me sometimes. It's like, I feel like they feign ignorance because it's easy, right? I think they know sometimes that this isn't the best way to go about it, but it's the easiest way, right? Or they get so caught up in their identity and like they said, you can't find a good, real, tangible fight to fight, so you invent one, right? And it's just, I don't know.
Yeah, I think we have come a pretty long way. I never hear people say gay in a negative way anymore. Yeah. I'm sure there are people out there that are still
I've been a few places,
real hillbillies, but not very often.
Yeah, it's less, right? And something I like is when you hear it, because you used to hear it so much, it wouldn't even, just that fact that you realize, that stings a little bit different. That word has changed, right? You understand that. I feel like that is progress too, just to be able to hear those words like that and to change how you react to them. Doesn't mean you need to go up to that person in a bar and say, "Hey, you can't say that," right? If that's you and that's that type of person and you want to do that, I'm not saying you can't, but it's more so about just understanding that those words, the effect that those words can have, right? Then if you choose, I'd be fine with anybody saying whatever the language they wanted, right? Even the real bad words, as bad as you want. If you understand those words and the consequences those had and you still use them and you're okay with that, I even respect that. I'm one of those people that I don't want to tell anybody to do anything. I hate being told what to do. One of my biggest pet peeves. That's why I don't do too well in work and I don't do well behind a desk, because I cannot stand people telling me what to do. But I bring that out to other people too, right? Like I want to show you the consequences of what you're doing so that you can make an educated choice. But once you've done that, I want you to make that choice. I don't want to have to tell you I don't want to babysit, right? Like it's kind of interesting to me.
I don't know that I respect it. I think you still need to know who your audience is, and you're still a trash human being if you have somebody in the room that you don't know and you're using words that could be hurtful to somebody. You're still a trash human being.
For sure. Yeah. I meant, I feel like you're super right on that. And I agree. I maybe just didn't say it the right way. Like, I think you're right. You still have to be cognizant of where your surroundings are when it is appropriate, right? And to know that and to know what your consequences are. But I would counter to that if there is people that are doing that and not realizing who's in the room, they don't understand they haven't been educated, right? Like, what I was saying of what I would respect, I don't think we've gotten there. I don't think there are people that do it. I think, actually, I shouldn't say it. The closest I see is comedians on podcasts that say, like, these are certain words that I say comedically and it's funny and I'm okay with that. And I know that technically I shouldn't. And they're saying it and they've shown that they respect that. And now their fans, who probably are those people that have would be the people that would be offended by those words, they don't mind because they've seen that. That's kind of where I'm getting to. I don't think you see it anywhere else. I don't think we've got to that point, but I think we could get there as a society where there's certain words that you can stand behind and you know why you use them and you don't use them with intent and you are careful about where you use them and you have an idea about that. I think the less restrictions, the better. I think what I like to see is educating people so that they choose not to because they understand the value of it. They're just not saying these words because I was told not to.
I see what you're saying there.
Like that's kind of the distinction I want to get to. But again, that's that is so much slower than just telling people they can't use the words, right? It's like being like, if we just show people the effect of it, those words might phase out over 10 years. Whereas we just say, you can't say those words, right? Like it's a bit more painful of a transition, but it's faster, right? And now it's balancing. And I see the value in that. And I can make that argument back to someone, and I see that, but I do think that there's some middle ground of it, right? Like, and if somebody made that argument back to me, say, hey, that's fair, right? If you think that progress needs to be made right now and it can't wait to do it that way and it needs to be done this way, I can respect that. That's a good argument, right? But that's not the argument I hear, right? It's just kind of like the argument I hear is, no, we have power over you. We're telling you this is the rules that you can and can't do. And that's what it is. It all comes back to how people use their power, right? Like, it just has to be respectful. And if you do it like that, and I feel like in Lister and around campus, it just wasn't done. It was more of we're going to set the rules because you guys are children and this is what isn't allowed and you have no say in this. And it wasn't like, here's why you shouldn't say this. And if you choose not to, you shouldn't, right? Like, this is what we want to experience, right? I don't think anybody really ever wants to make anyone hurt. Let's caveat that. I think there are definitely some people that want to make people hurt. I shouldn't say that, but I think for the most part, it's more ignorance than it is actual hate a lot of the time, right? I think that's also something you see from like being in a rural area. There's not a lot of hateful people. I feel like for the most part, small towns, there's some pretty nice people and their language might make them seem hateful, but it's when you understand it deeply, you see it's way more ignorance. They just don't know. They don't know these cultures. They don't know how these words can affect people. They don't see people that would be affected, right? And that is kind of my idea of it, of just educating people so that they understand that. Because I feel like people from my hometown, if you explain that to them and they understood that, they would definitely change the way they talk just because they are respectful people and they don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, right? And if you showed like, hey, I know that's just funny to you and you don't mean it that way, but this is the way it can come off, and you explain it to them like that, they'll definitely change, right? Because I feel like that was the ways that I changed. I feel like I was lucky that I had some people I really respected in Lister that would explain things to me that way. And that really hit me a different way and maybe get on board. Because someone says, you can't say this. My immediate instinct is to say, fuck you, I'm going to say that. But if someone explains it to me, I'm like, okay, I can get on board with that. And I'm happy that I had some really cool people that were helping me with that journey in the first couple of years of Lister, right? And I think if I didn't have that, I might have rebelled against it a little bit more. Like we saw, I think there was definitely some people, I shouldn't say everybody in Lister,
totally.
there were some people that rebelled hard against it, right? And were saying all those words as much as they can away from people, right? But just to get it out because they were so upset with the culture that was around them. But they still wouldn't say it if somebody was in the room, right? They did understand it a little bit. It did sink in, which is good, and that's progress, right? Like it clearly sank in a little bit, but I don't know. It's interesting.
I don't know. I don't think there's any teaching my mom some of the words that she shouldn't be saying.
Yeah, exactly. And that's and that's natural, right? Like especially, like my grandparents too, like some of the stuff they'd say, and not even like that way, but I found like even more like about people's weights and stuff, like, oh, look at those fat people right there. It's like, they came here, you grandma. Like, and that's not even like that. That's a whole different story. It's not even like racial in that, but there's all that stuff too. But it's one of those things where if you set your expectations that you're going to change those people, that's just you putting your expectations in a bad spot, right? Like that is natural progression. That's why things are moving, is because people, I think anybody born in our area has so much less of an excuse for this stuff, that there's such a different standard for what we are and like what is expected of us. But then we try and take that standard and enforce it onto these people that have no idea. Nobody's explained it to them. They don't understand. They've lived a life for 50, 60, 70 years where this is okay and it's hard to change, right? Like, and that's not to give them the free out that they don't have to, but you have to temper your expectations of how much that's going to impact, right? Like it's one of those things. Because like when you say it about my grandparents, I've seen such things with my parents that have changed just in the time I've known them. And I think me and Courtney educating them, right? They might just stare in public a bit if they see somebody, see something they didn't, because I think that's also true is like we got to see and open up about a lot of aspects that they didn't. Like when I talked to my parents, they said they never got to see any handicapped kids in school. Like they were taken out, they were in different schools. They just never saw it. Right. So when I'm 6 years old and I see my dad maybe staring at somebody with a mental disability, hey, don't stare. Oh, sorry. Right. And he wouldn't do that today. Right. But like probably years ago when I remember that story in a McDonald's, I was probably like 8 years old and I told him, right. And he realized that, but he doesn't do it anymore. But now if I said that to maybe an 80-year-old, I wouldn't expect that kind of change, right? It's just about tempering expectations and being okay with the rate of change, even if you're not satisfied with it. Of just you can't, even if you're unsatisfied with the change, you can't force people to the degree that you will without causing it to slide the other way, right? You have to be balanced with what you do and set your expectations. And I feel like if there was a lot more of that, the change would go so much faster and would be so much more effective because, again, I don't think people want to hurt people's feelings. And if you can find a better way instead of yelling at people to educate them, it was. And I think podcasts do that. I feel like for myself, I listened to a podcast with a trans person for the first time probably 4 years ago and really heard their story and what it was. And it changed me so deeply about what it is and my understanding and how much more care I have and compassion. And I feel like that is cool to see. And it was just a different way. 10 years ago, there wasn't podcasts to learn those kind of lessons, right? And there's a podcast on everything out there now. There's a YouTube video on everything. It's all out there. It's just about the people coming up. But 80-year-olds aren't listening to a podcast, right? They're not getting that education. But I think we're on the right track, and there's so many things being done right now that we'll see the results of in 10 years, 20 years from now, that it's going to be a really good place. But people get so frustrated with that timeline that they push it too far and start walking us backwards.
Yeah, my mom, I have a cousin who's a transgendered man.
Right.
And my mom is always saying, I don't understand what it means for you to feel like a man. I don't know what it feels like as a woman.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, you don't need to know what it feels like. You don't need to understand. Mm-hmm. You just have to understand that that's what they are going through.
Right. Exactly. And I feel like knowing the complexity, because that was, I don't think I'd ever said it out loud, but I think that was what I was feeling. I don't think I ever articulated myself, but until I listened to that podcast, it was like, yeah, I can't understand that. Like, and again, I was just saying, I don't need to understand that. Whatever you do, was always like that. I just hate telling people what to do. Whatever makes you happy, you give her. That was always since I was a little kid, that was very deeply ingrained in me. Nobody had to teach me that. That was just always something that felt that way. But then when I did listen to it and I did understand, I was like, oh, it's not non-understandable. It's just really complex, and it's hard to learn about it in 5 minutes. It takes like a 2-hour podcast of them telling their whole story and all the nuances of it and having somebody that can ask questions. Because the podcast I listened to was Ari Shaffir's, who's one of the most rank comedians, most inappropriate. And he asks but he's really nice. And at the end of the day, but he's asking these questions and making it funny, but allowing to ask probably the questions that I want to ask, but it wouldn't be appropriate, but just do it one-on-one in a safe spot where it's not like he's making fun of them. They have banter, right? And for them to ask those types of questions that, probably people like your mom would want to ask, but would be inappropriate to ask. And if they asked somebody, actually, you'd go like, oh my God, what is going on? You can't ask that, right? But he did it. And that allowed me to understand so much more deeply. And I feel like I think that's going to be the thing that changes, is finding more stories. And that's where people kind of roll their eyes at representation, right? Like all that. It is really important to have representation. I did a podcast with a guy from my hometown who was one of the best hockey players, really tough guy. And he was gay, but he didn't know it. And I feel like because of the society and how it was treated around, he almost wouldn't even allow himself to even allow that to enter. He didn't know himself, and he dealt with so much anger and so much that went on. And he talked about what drug that out and made it go so much longer was that he never saw a representation of himself, because there was no representation of strong, manly hockey players that were also gay, right? That was just not a thing. Him growing up, the only representation you saw was the most effeminate, cartoonish representation. But there's all sorts of people, right? And I feel like the more you can show that representation in all these ways, and I think that's what's so amazing about the internet, because now you don't need $2 million and all these cameras to make something that can represent somebody. You can it's kind of wide open. I think the more that representation comes, that it's going to show so many more paths and show people that it can be okay. You don't need to, suffer for 18 years until you can move to the city and find your group of people, find your tribe. You can find that earlier, maybe, through the internet, find some sort of solace in yourself and some tribe, right? Because I feel like that's almost more important than anything. People just don't want to feel lonely. They just want to feel accepted. I feel like that's at the core of what the argument should be, is that, the argument for trans people all got talked about on bathrooms. They don't want bathrooms. They want respect. They want to be treated like a human, right? And that's at the end of the deal. But now when you frame it as if they're fighting for bathrooms, that's nonsense. It's nonsense. But now it takes the whole argument away from what anybody wants. Yeah. They don't want that. We don't want that. Nobody. But I feel like that's what happens, is instead of doing the hard thing where you actually make societal change, the easy thing is just to make it a fight over a bathroom, because now we don't have to do any work, right? Like that's what you see so much, is like,
it's too expensive.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And now we can shut it down. Now, we had the argument and you lost, right? But that was so not the argument we even wanted to have. That's not the rights that we were looking for. We just want to be treated, understood, and like that can look different to a lot of different people. And that, I think, is also going to dictate how responsive people are. Is what is your ask? Like, what are you trying to get people on board with, right? Just basic human dignity and respect. That's a certain ask, right? Respecting pronouns, that's a different ask. Wanting everybody on earth to learn 90 different pronouns, how they all apply and what that is specifically, that's a different ask as well. And within that, that's going to bring a different response from people that maybe need this learning, right? And I feel like that understanding and just starting slow and starting just to ask those basic things, because that's what's really important. All those pronouns and stuff, that's important to certain people, and certain ones are important to certain people. But as a generality, the respect and the dignity of just letting people be, and not looking at them any differently, that's what people are really after. But it seems like that's not what the fight gets turned into, right? Like, and that's what social media is, and that's what news are. They want to get whatever is going to be the most salacious headline to get people worked up about it, right? That's how it transforms from the real argument, gets taken away. I think we saw it with the Black Lives Matter protests, right? There was something that happened that sparked real emotional change, and there was a lot of pent up anger over things that some unfairness that has been around for a really long time and is real. But then you could see it slowly get co-opted to all these other battles, and people taking it on, and people that have nothing to do with Black Lives Matter, like so many white people taking it on to fight their own battles through this. And it was like, what has happened here? Like, that is not what we're arguing. How did this argument change? Like, from like, we don't want cops to kill black people like they are at this rate, right? Like, that was the argument. And in probably within 10 days, it was totally blown into this weird amalgamation. But again, that's their easy way out of not having to make real change. It's now, let's change this argument into something else that we can, either where it's never resolvable, or where it's an easy answer, like, oh, it's too expensive, right? And that's what it is. And it's unfortunate to see, but that's kind of how it is. But I feel like if they understand that, or I just wish that the people that were out trying to make change could really understand that and use those, like, keep that in mind when they're making their strategy, so they could see that when, as soon as they try and co-opt it into something else, say, no, we're not talking about that. This is the one subject, like we are locked in. This is what it was. And that's what I saw, because I could see it coming. It was like, there's these protests, there's all this emotion, but there's not a lot of people saying, like, this is what we're fighting for. This is what we want. We want A, B, C, and D. It was just a lot of passion, which is going to happen. But I think it's just so unfortunate to see it, because you knew it was going to come. It's like, oh, how are they going to spin this into something else that we don't have to deal with it? And it broke my heart to watch. Like, I was hoping that it wouldn't. I hope this was, I think every time something like that happens, you hope this is the one. This is what's going to change. People are going to wake up. And then, a couple of days later, it changed into something else. And now you don't hear people talking about it. The argument is now completely different, right? It's sad.
Yeah, well, especially it happening during COVID.
Yeah.
There's so many people who have either nothing going on or their own hardships that they want people to pay attention to, that it's so easy to, for it to get distracted.
Yeah. And I think there's, as much as I try to stay away from the conspiratorial things, I think there's also a lot of people that benefit by changing that message and actively trying to disrupt what they're trying to do. I think that is also, I think there's some people that maybe lean too hard into that lane and think it's all a conspiracy. They're all out to get somebody, but to dismiss it altogether, that's not happening, I think it's ridiculous, right? Like, there were some pretty clear examples of people inciting violence at those protests that were pretty peaceful, right? Those guys that was going around with a hammer, breaking windows and stuff, all masked up, and then you saw them in the next town over doing the same thing. Like, I have some questions about that. This pile of bricks that kept getting left places, like, I don't want to put my conspiracy hat on, but I would like to have some answers on that. I'd like to be an investigator, right? Because like you say, if there's an incentive for somebody to change it, you have to at least keep your mind open to that. And I feel like that's what's so unfortunate these days about what conspiracy theories have turned into. What people think of that is like, now you can't even lean to that lane at all, right? Like, even though there's probably some kernels of truth, there's probably 90% bullshit and silliness, but there's probably some kernels of truth in that you have to look at, right? I don't know.
Yeah, and then the right-wing media gets a hold of the peaceful protests turning into violence, and it's just straight nonsense, most of it. For the most part, everyone is respectful and not doing anything wrong.
And then you see the same thing, right? Like in Portland, you see this these absolutely, they're violent every night for 100 nights in a row. They're always violent. They never don't turn violent. It's pretty much accepted violence. But then on the left-wing media, they say nothing's going on in Portland. They're blown out of proportion. Nothing's going on there. When these actual on-the-ground journalists are saying, it is madness. They're trying to burn things down every night. And it's like, you see the same thing happen on, like, I just think media in general, I think trying to say if it's right-wing or left-wing, I think they both have gone off the deep end, right? And it's like, where does a person that's in the middle somewhere get any sort of news? Because now everything is on that. It's either one side or the other, because that's where the money is, right? Because news media was dying. There was nobody watching the news. Things were in the tank. Then Trump came around, and their numbers started going up, and they started polarizing even more. If we take all the nuance out of it and just put it towards exactly what our fan base wants to hear, we'll make more money, right? And it's just so unfortunate that can happen. But again, it goes back to what we said at the very start. There was so little accountability in so many of these huge positions of power over the years, but we never got tested. Nothing ever happened, right? And then the first test that came, I mean, COVID was also a big one, but Trump getting in there, that was the first time we had to see these tested of these news media sites, if they have been corrupted and all that, and we got to see it. But now people didn't realize it. Now they're taking this as if it's true, right? They're turning on Fox News as if it's exactly what's happening, or the exact same thing, turning on CNN and thinking that's the truth. And when they're both so far from what the actual truth is, that now everybody's kind of lost it, and it just pulls people apart when, for the most part, everybody, if somebody saw somebody on the side of the road that needed help, it wouldn't matter if they're Republican, Democrat, right? They just want to help. But if you go on social media or the news, it seems like that's not true. And it's just, it's amplifying the worst parts of human nature, right? Because that's where it makes money. And I think you can do the opposite and make money. I think that's what guys like Joe Rogan do, where they have this huge following because people listen to him, because they lean into just the best parts of humanity. Same with Lex Fridman, these guys that people are really drawn to them because all that is out there is this negative and the worst parts of humanity. And these people just say like, hey, we just want everyone to love everybody and have some laughs and joke around, learn some stuff. Like, people are desperate for that. And that's cool to me that there is that restores my faith a lot, because I think when you just look at the news side of it and think like, oh man, this is what people are after, I think that's what they want you to think. But really, the majority of people are caring, don't hate everybody, don't hate the other side, right? They probably have a certain couple aspects that really mean a lot to them. Maybe it's abortion, maybe it's taxes, maybe it's that thing. That's the only thing that really ties them to this group of people. For the most part, they just want to love everybody, but this one piece is. And I think that's what they're trying to pull people away from. But that gives me lots of faith that there's these huge, huge swaths of people. Like, Rogan gets more people listening to him in a month than, CNN and Fox News put together in 10 years, right? Like, it's not even close. And that gives me hope. It's like, oh, so people are. It might seem like it, if you go on social media, it seems like everybody hates each other, but you put your phone down and you go for a walk. It doesn't seem like that. And I think it's just so hard for people to understand that the internet isn't real. It's not fake. It's not 100% fake like some people think, but it's not 100% real. It's somewhere in the middle, like most things are. And I think that's, the more people understand that, and the more people but we're just in the first couple of years of the internet. We don't know how to do it. We're figuring this out as we go. Everybody is. And I think that's probably the big shift change that needs to happen, is people really stepping back and evaluating their relationship with the internet, social media, all those things, and realizing what it is and what it isn't, and where it helps them, where it hurts them, where it's amplifying the bad things in their life and the negative aspects. Like you say, like, people that are so caught up in sexism are unhappy, right? Like, you have to do those checks and find where those are. And that's what's going to bring you to a point where you are happy. Because I think if you don't, you're going to just go down that rabbit hole of negativity and find those things, and you're going to look for it and you're going to find it, because there's money to be made. If they see that there's a swath of people that are looking for sexism, now there's money there. If I can, twist a story to make there be sexism in it, I can make clicks, I can make money, and it incentivizes it. But people just need to realize that is the game they're playing. It doesn't matter what you're after. They'll serve it to you. That's what the internet has become.
Yeah, and the more that you click on one particular subject, the more that Facebook, Twitter, whatever you're on, is going to keep giving you more and more of that.
It sure is.
So there's obviously negative sides to the internet, and it can make some really bad people.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you were talking about the internet earlier, and
Yeah.
it can help you find real connections with people that are like you, it's still important.
Yeah, for sure. And that's where I think like a big realization I had a couple years ago is that you have relationships with everything, right? Like I always think of like, I always thought of relationships as if like with people, but I think you have a relationship with caffeine. I think you have a relationship with your phone. You have a relationship with social media. And I feel like you need to just step back and understand where are things serving you. It doesn't mean that the phone is bad itself. There's pieces of that. It doesn't mean Twitter's bad itself. It doesn't mean all these, well, I don't know. I can make a pretty good argument that Twitter is pretty bad, right? Like, but I think you just need to examine your particular relationships, and within those, what parts serve you and what part don't. And I feel like that's a lot of work too. And I feel like, again, in this age, people don't want to put in a lot of work, but I think it's so the value of that little bit of work you can put in to examine these relationships and see what part, okay, I can find community on the internet. I can find this piece, and that is good. But now what are the negatives to it, right? Like, and you just need to be really cognizant. And I feel like that's a lot to ask of people, that in a society where everybody wins and participation trophies and there's always an easy way out, there's always somebody to hold your hand, there's always a safe space. It's hard to tell people you got to put in a little bit of work here to understand, but I don't know what else is going to change. I think the only solution to so many of the issues of almost every issue we talked about this whole time, I think personal accountability is the solution to all of those. And I feel like just more and more people are finding whatever excuse they can to not take personal responsibility, right? And I feel like that is what we need to add in every area, right? At university, personal accountability needs to happen, right? Instead of all these safe spaces, you need to find people that are personally accountable, right? In government, in politics, in the healthcare system. Personal accountability is the biggest piece, right? And also for happiness too. I think so many people are just going along with the flow and blaming the world. Oh, it's so hard. Woe is me. And they're not taking any accountability, and they're not happy. And then you see people that stop saying, oh, it's the world, and start saying, oh, maybe I can do some things differently. They start changing some things and maybe going to the gym a bit, maybe, only going on social media for an hour a day or whatever it is, or cutting it back, or putting their phone on black and white mode because it helps them stay off it. There's all these little things, and then they start to be happier. And it's a positive feedback loop, and they start to get out of it, and they start to see positive change. But it all starts with that accountability and not blaming other things other than yourself. Because it's so easy to blame other things. Life is hard. It's easy to blame life because life is hard for everybody. For the Queen of England, you look at the person that you think has the best life possible, life is still hard, right? That's just how life works. Being a human is not an easy thing to do. So you're always going to have a built-in excuse. If you want it, it's there. You can take it anytime you want. But there's so much value, and I feel like that's what we need to do, is to show people the value in not doing that, because it's so easy. It's right there. It's that cookie that's sitting right in front of you, and that's hard to not take it and do something else. But once you start doing it, and you can do it in the smallest way, like instead for the last minute of your shower in the mornings, turn it to cold, right? People talk about making your bed. That's always a big one. It's just these small things. If you can do it, it's gonna start this. If you start taking accountability, it's gonna do it, and that's where. Now I'm back to optimistic, Jen. I went all the way to the pessimistic side. Now I'm back, baby. Oh, it's funny, right? Like I just see that in so many areas, and that's what I learned from these podcasts, right? Like that's what Joe Rogan's saying all the time. That's what these people are saying is, if you want to be happy, you're going to have to start. It's not going to be easy. You got to work at it, but it's there if you want to do it. And here's the roadmap. Here's the roadmap to it. And here's 1,500 episodes of people coming on, and whatever their story is, essentially it's the same thing. Hey, I took personal responsibility and I'm happier now, right? Like you could break that down to half the episodes.
But it is still also super hard to be happy.
It is. And you have to work at it every day, and you can be doing everything right, and there's going to be something that throws a wrench into it, right? Like that's, I think understanding that, I feel like almost we tell people that happiness is just, if you just do all the right things, you just, get your university degree, you're going to get a job handed to you, and then you're going to do that job, you're going to have this, and you're going to have this, and you'll be happy. I think they're setting bad expectations for people of like, no, happiness, you got to work for it every day. It doesn't matter how good your life is. You're going to have to work to be happy. You're going to have to take it. It's all on you. Whether you choose to, it's hard to tell people that you can choose to be happy, but it's true. It's just not easy, right? And I feel like just changing that expectation, just like we need to change the expectation of what a university degree is, right? From what people think it is to what it actually is in reality. We need to change people's understanding of what happiness is and how you get there, because I think we're setting people up for failure by telling them, oh, you just follow these things, do what you're supposed to do, and you'll be happy. I feel like that's just, I don't know. It seems like there's no good can come of that, right? I feel like setting people up that, hey, no, happiness is a hard goal. It's admirable, and you should work towards it, but you're going to have to put in a hell of a lot of work, and it's not going to be easy, right? I feel like if that was the understanding from if there was kids movies telling that, story instead of all this other stuff, I think we'd start getting a little.
All you need to do is find a man that wants to kiss you when you're sleeping.
Exactly,
that's
right?
it.
That's it, and you're happy, right? But that's quite the message to send. Oh man, you're very right. That is, and I think, but again, it almost goes back to that change thing, because I think we're seeing better stories being told. We're not seeing the, Sleeping Beauty being told over and over again. There are some more, right? Avengers, some extremely powerful female characters that are showing maybe more different directions of what you can and can't be. And it's not to say that there's not some people that will find happiness in a man. I know that sounds awful to say, but everybody's different, right? Like some people, they do find happiness in that, and starting a family, and that's all they've ever wanted, is to find that is their picture of happiness. Who's to say that's not, if somebody's, that's their happiness, go chase it, whatever that is. I think we put too many constrictions on what we want people to, I want you to be happy, but only this way. Like, you can't do that. That's disrespecting women if you just, are a housewife, right? Like, no, if that's what makes them happy, that's what makes them happy.
I have my sister-in-law and my brother, they got married 2 years ago now, and she is so insanely happy. Yeah. And that was her goal, like, to get married. Like, she has her hobbies and she paints, but she wants to be a mom and she wants to be a wife, and she's so happy. And when I first thought about that, I was like, man, that seems like it sucks. Yeah. But that sucks for me.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, that doesn't necessarily suck for her.
And I think that is the healthiest outlook you can have, right? And I feel, but that's a hard realization for people, I think, to realize that it's funny to talk about at a certain age in development, when you're a kid, right? There's a certain, I can't remember, going back to the psych course, I'm trying to find that first time you realize where not everybody is you, and that people have different feelings, right? And you learn that lesson at that time. But then it's almost like we immediately forget that lesson, and we still think that everybody thinks like you. And it's so hard to take yourself out of that. And actually, I just had on the mayor of Slave Lake and had a talk with him and asked him what were the hardest things about realizing that. He said, like, that was exactly it, of realizing not everybody thinks like me. There's so many other people that have completely different lives, that have completely different values, that certain things mean more to them, and to really listen to those people genuinely and take those ideas too, and balance all of those together, as many as you can, all these different viewpoints, to make a best decision for the town, right? But like, I don't know how old he was when he started that job, but he still had to relearn that, right at the start. I feel like that is one of the hardest things to learn. And I feel like some people can get caught in that, where they just realize, oh, well, I wouldn't want to do that, so why would they want to? They must be unhappy. And then it just doesn't compute in their head when they see somebody being happy doing something that they would be completely unhappy doing, right? Like, it's funny. And I think also, like, when you talk about, like, that you didn't want to be behind a desk or whatever, right? Like, that was something, I feel like people sometimes don't even know that in themselves. They're so unaware of who they are and what they want, that they just assume, like, okay, I get a job, I work at that, that's what's good, that's what's going to make me happy. They just follow it because they've never asked themselves a question of what they like, right? And I think that can be your family, right? I think that can be your society, people around you, right? Like, that don't allow you to ask those questions and search and explore a bit, right? Like, I think that's what comes from restriction, but the more you can do it. But I think that's also hard, because that's a scary thing, to think that everybody doesn't think like you, and it makes the world a bit of I don't know if it makes it a lonelier pace, but like
makes it interesting.
It does. It makes it interesting, right? And that's what I think. But I think for some people, there's so much more comfort in just thinking, like, everybody's like me. I have it all figured out, and they don't want to step outside of that and see the full extent of what life has to offer, which I think is great. And I feel like it's hard for them. And again, I'm making my own mistake by saying, like, how can they not? Maybe that's what gives them happiness, right? Because that just, to me, that is my unhappiness, right? Like, I just read The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. She talks about those kind of people that kind of follow what society wants to do, and people that follow their own trail and uncompromisable, right? And that is me. I feel like I'm very unhappy when I have to be told what to do, and I don't have full freedom to chase whatever I want to do, even if that's a weird thing. Because I'm a weird dude. You know this more than probably a lot of people, right? Like, I'm an odd duck, and I have weird passions and weird curiosities. I'm always exploring that, but I don't want to be held like, oh, you can't ask those questions. That's taboo. You can't talk about those subjects. Like, I want to talk about it all, because deep down, I know I'm a good person. I don't want to hurt people. I might ask some questions that might offend some people, but like, never, it's all with peace and love. And I know deep down that that's what it is, right? And it's just to hold that as my number one value, of that freedom and that flexibility to do whatever I want. That is what I value. That is the top of my totem pole. And if I can keep that, I'm going to be happy, right? And the and that's kind of the viewpoint I've been looking at things through lately. Like, what is giving me freedom? What is taking away freedom, right? For a long time, what is making me money? What isn't making me money? That's what I was brought up as, of like everything I chased, going to university, getting a business degree, all those things, because I was chasing money. I thought like, these are the ways that like I can be as financially, set as early as possible. And that's what's going to make me happy. And I did all those things and I was like, oh man, I'm not really happy. Like really what I like is freedom and just to be able to explore and not have to compromise, because I love what I do at my job, but I have to be a certain version of myself there. I can let out my weirdness a little bit. I can crack some jokes and do that, but for the most part, I can't roll in there wearing a giant comfy sweater, right? Like I would, like when I'm at home and right in sweatpants and a ball cap and, listen to music and dance around and like do all those things. I'm showing that, and that's fine. And I can do that. But at the end of the day, I think I can find other pursuits that maybe allows more of the full potential of who I am to come out. And I don't have to be embarrassed about it. I said some embarrassing shit on this podcast already, but it's so freeing to be able to just be like, yeah, I am a weirdo. I've always been a weirdo. People that know me well know that, right? Like I think anybody that knew me in Lister, other than, saw some of my weird things, right? Like of just who I was and out at the bars. And I like being the center of attention. I like making people laugh, and I like being a goofball, being a clown, right? That's why I got kicked out of class. Like, it's not like I was a bad student or I didn't do well in school. I was so much more focused on making people laugh and being, funny. I wasn't learning anything because that's just who I was. But I don't know. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think I'm very proud of that. I love that side of me that's wild and crazy, and I just want to explore it. But I think so many people don't have the freedom or I don't want to say privilege, but it kind of like that is a privileged thing for me to be at the point where I can ask myself those questions and realize that about myself. Because I feel like people sometimes have a hard life that doesn't have them any, if you grow up poor and you're scrambling for everything you have and you're always fighting every day just to put food in your mouth, you don't have time to sit there and go, well, what do I really like? What deep down, what is my calling or whatever that is? That is not available to you, right? And I think you always also have to keep that in mind and not, I feel like I'm sad at what the word privilege has been put through in the last couple of years, because I think it is such the white privilege and these kind of privilege thing. It is a really powerful topic if you do it the right way and you don't overuse it and, yell at people with it and use it as a baton to hit people with. It's powerful, because I think that was some of the biggest learning that was, oh yeah, I am pretty lucky. I grew up in a place, I have a loving family. Like everything I could want, I had. And that is a privilege, right? And I hate talking about it, because I think you say that word and everybody just clams up and shuts their eyes because they're so sick of hearing about it. But it is true. And I wish we almost need like a new word for it that we can like use, so we can still use that topic that isn't so corrupted. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The epigenetics of, like socioeconomic status is just insane.
It's insane.
Like, if you grow up poor, you don't understand that if you do that 2-for-1 deal or buy one, get one 50% off, you're saving money in the long run.
Yeah.
You're just going to buy whatever you need.
Yeah.
And you're not going to think about it because you don't understand. Not that you don't understand, your brain just doesn't work in that way because of the way that you had so much stress growing up. And it's just really sad that they have so much stress throughout their whole life, even just from like a childhood experience, or even if you are born to a mother who was really stressed when she was pregnant with you,
right.
And then you're adopted out to a wonderful family that you have a stress-free life, your genetics are still switched to have those stress responses.
And almost in the same vein as that too, of the 2-for-1 thing, is now the way money works. And this is something I didn't even realize until I went to school and realized how investing works and inflation. Like, if you give somebody $10, right, or $1,000 in a year, that $1,000 is going to be, if they don't do anything, if they just leave it, that is going to be less, right? Like, so if you understand how money works and you know how to invest and stuff, which is such, like, when you talk about privilege, like, to understand money and how it works and what to do with it and how to be financially savvy is such a step up. Like, you're playing a completely different game than if you don't. And where's people that are struggling going to get that kind of information? Where are they going to learn that kind of stuff? And now they're so behind the 8 ball that even if they do find success and get some money, they don't know how to grow that money. They don't know how to hold on to it and make it stretch and make it do all those things. There's like a huge disparity there. And I think that is one of those biggest things. I think you nailed it right on the head, Jen. Like, that the socioeconomic factors is such a huge piece of all of this. And people know that. Powers that be know that. And there's people that make a lot of money off the back of that thing right there. So now, instead, this is another one of those things where they don't want people to wake up to that decision that it's poor people. So they would rather have people think it's race. They would rather have people think it's sexism. They'd rather have people think it's all these things than just there's systems in place to keep people poor, because to have rich people, you need to have poor people. That's kind of how it works, or that's how it's worked for millions and millions of years. I think we've just recently kind of passed that point where with technology, it's not like that anymore. We don't have to have the extreme poverty that we have in the world. I think, like T, when he came on, he was talking about, like you could take 0.1% of the wealth of the wealthiest in the world and really make some real change. And I think that is where it changed. But instead of waking up, because if I'm a billionaire, I will pay millions and millions and millions of dollars to change that fight from us holding poor people down to whatever it is. I don't care. They don't care. They don't care if it's race or sexism or all these things. They just want it to not be them at their door realizing that, hey, we're keeping...
Get away from my money.
Yeah, exactly. So
sir.
Yeah, fight over race, fight over mass, fight over whatever it is. Just don't realize that Amazon is making all this money and you are off the backs of these poor people that are struggling every day. And they will do whatever they want to change that conversation so that it doesn't wake up to, no, there are people in charge, because once that realization makes on grand scale, that's when the pitchforks come out. That's where revolution happens, right? Like it's that let them have cake kind of thing, right? How can we push the envelope so much and make as much money as we can and put people in the worst position without it tipping over that edge where people wake up to it and start to push back, right? Like we have to give a little bit every once in a while so that, and change the story and throw some smoke bombs and, put some agent provocateurs at some protests to make it look angry, because we don't want people waking up to that. They would much rather put money towards that. Just like Nike would rather spend $5 million on a Black Lives Matter campaign than do any sort of actual economic changes to their structure that would help people. Right? That is so much cheaper, so much easier. They have a board of 10 people that are all white. They're not going to, put some black people on the board. They'd rather have, pay $5 million, keep our jobs, keep my friends in here. And now it looks like we're on. And that's where I think people need to wake up to that, because I think that's just giving them easy outs. If we as a society say that's okay, Nike, you did a campaign. That's what we think. Like it's all about campaigns and stuff and no actual real change. We're giving them an easy out. We're not asking the tough questions. We're not holding their feet to the fire. We're not holding them accountable. Right. And I think it's hard to hold people accountable when you're not holding yourself accountable. So it all comes back to self-accountability, really. But it's one of those things where, again, it seems obvious, but it's so convoluted and so covered up, and there's so much money to be made covering it up that it's hard, and you can't blame people for not realizing it, right? Like it's one of those things where it's almost like $1 trillion industry of keeping people away from those realizations, and then people are blaming them. How can you not see this? It's like, how could they see it, right? There's all these forces at work to keep them from seeing it. And also, how are you going to see that when you're just trying to put food on your table? You're not looking at the socioeconomic factors and how the world works and all that. You're just trying to make sure you have enough food for you and your kids, right? Like
yeah, and even if you do see it, what are you going to do about it? Exactly,
right? There's so much power. There's so much to be. And now you think, just elect the right people. But the only people that are within that pool of people that you can elect are all people to get to that point, to enter that pool, that have been
all just colossal assholes.
Yeah, and exactly. and they've all taken that money from Amazon and all these places that are keeping that structure in place and making all these decisions that are really running the world, right? Like the way I look at it is, huge corporations and government, everyone looks at them separate things. Like that is the exact same thing. It's the same people. They hire and move people around. Like it's interchangeable. They all have the same things, right? Until you realize that, it seems like, wow, and this world doesn't really work. Like it doesn't seem like it should work this way. And then you make that realization, that's now all the incentives fall into place, and it all starts to make sense once you realize that. It's not, we think we elect the people to be the voice, or we elect government officials to be the voice of the people. No, they're not. They're the voice of these big companies that are paying them, right? Like, and we see that. But the unfortunate thing is, if somebody wants to come in and break that cycle, like Tulsi Gabbard did in the States, they have everybody came out after. They said she was an agent of Russia, even though she was like a war hero and an amazing. She comes from Hawaii, like an amazing person. But they just drug her through the mud because she was one of those people that was gonna, open people's eyes to the corruption that's going on there. But they just did everything in their power. But what excites me now, she realized that in the last one. So now she started a podcast, and now she's growing an organic base where she's honest with people. And I think that's going to be some of the next steps. Is now, if one person goes up against the system, it's really hard. But now there's things like podcasts and YouTube channels, stuff that can now it's not just that one person. It's that one person back. Like Andrew Yang, he's one of the big examples. It's like the Yang Gang. He has a crazy supportive base that understands, that have listened to him on these long form podcasts and him doing speeches and really believe in what his message is. So now it's not just him. He's up against this huge, conglomeration of people that don't want to see any of this change, that are really making some good money off of this. But now it's not just Andrew Yang going up against him. It's Andrew Yang plus his entire Yang Gang, right? And I feel like the same with Tulsi Gabbard and all these people. I feel like that is what's going to arm good people with breaking past those barriers. And I think what's unfortunate is Trump kind of did that. He said like, oh, I'm going to go in there. He was successful where nobody thought they could, but he was an asshole about it and didn't do good things. And once he got in, he did the exact same things and get the exact same cronies and kept the system going and didn't actually drain the swamp. He made it worse, right? But he was that one person that, like, I feel like he hurt everybody by letting them shore up the weaknesses in their system that allowed him to do it. So now the next person that would do that with actual true intentions is going to have so much harder of a race, because now they're going to, okay, now how did Trump break in and bypass the system? Okay, we need to put checks and balances. Now we need, not only do you need to have 2% polling to get on the debate stage, you need to have this and this and this. And they put all these restrictions to cancel anybody out that isn't part of that system. And it's like, I'm sure you can make a bunch of more arguments of what Trump did, but to me, that was his most egregious thing that he did. He took that one, back door that you could just shove somebody in that really had truth and could tear down some of this stuff. And now he showed everybody that back door. And there's more. I think there's also other ways you can hopefully get somebody with actual true intentions that wants to do good and wants to help people into that seat. But I think it's just so much harder since Trump. That is my biggest issue with it, right? Like, I think so many people were so mad at him that they were saying the most ridiculous reasons to get mad at him. I was like, no, there's real good reasons for it. We don't need to invent stuff. We don't need to lie. We don't need to, clickbait and all that stuff. And that's what gave him power, is he would intentionally say stuff that was so close to the line that he knew was too tempting for them not to just change a little bit and put out. And then they did it. And then now his whole base goes, look at their line. They changed what he said. He's doing it on purpose. Like, it was just so frustrating to watch the game be played and watch both sides, right and left, just fight at each other when that's exactly what they're trying to do, right? Like, I don't know.
And getting further and further apart.
Yeah.
It's so silly that they only have two parties.
It's so silly, right? And that's what I'm talking about, like ranked choice voting or things that do nothing to help any one person, but really take a blow to the power of holding people from getting in, right? Like, because if you don't vote for one of those two parties, they always say, no, we have more than one. You can vote libertarian, but there's no point. You're throwing your vote away, right? But ranked choice voting, now you're not throwing your vote away. Now it allows for somebody to come up. It really kneecaps the power system of those two parties. And it's so obvious. There's no downsides. The fact that they don't is the biggest example. That's my biggest proof when I say this to people and say, well, how am I going to believe you? That is my biggest proof to people. If they actually had the people's interests at heart and weren't trying to play this game, the system, ranked choice voting would have been put in years ago, right? Like, that is one of the biggest ones. And there's all this other proof, but like, it's just things like that where it frustrates me that people don't see that, because I feel like that's one of those really obvious ones. That's why I bring it up on this podcast so much, because it's like, that is one of the biggest red flags to me, right? You don't need a business degree to see that there's some fuck shit going on there, right? Like that is one of those easy opening doors, get your foot into the door to understand maybe more of the stuff going on. But it's hard for people because they just pick that team. Their parents, their grandparents, they were all Republicans. So I'm a Republican. They get so deep into that tribalism, because tribalism is baked into us. Evolutionarily, tribalism is what helped us survive. That's what got us to this point. So they're playing on those emotions and getting you tied in that you will completely avoid counter information, because that it doesn't fit your worldview and what you've seen and who you are. Like we talk about, sometimes it becomes your whole ideology. Your political leanings is your whole being, right? Like, you're not going to, if someone brings a real well-formed argument against it, you're just going to, plug your ears and go, la, 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 I'm not listening, right? Like, it's unfortunate, but that's what it is. But I think the more people that are showing it, and I think the more things are coming apart, and I think the internet is a big part of it. It's just, they say sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? Like, just accountability, transparency. It's way harder to cover shit up these days. It's way harder to keep this going. And I think that's why it's getting so aggressive and so egregious. What we're seeing is because this is the last kicks and screams of a dying system, of they're just trying to hold on to their power. But more people are seeing through it. More people are waking up to this every day, and they're getting worried. And that's what gives me optimism. I was like, oh, I like that they're worried. I like that, things are changing. They see that more people are waking up, that Joe Rogan is saying some real dangerous things to their power structures. And there's hundreds and hundreds of millions of people listening every month. That is a scary prospect to them, right? And that's just music to my ears. I get so excited by it. I'm like, oh, I hope. And it's not just and it's not for an I told you so reason or any of that. It's that if more people wake up to that, real change is going to happen, right? If you want, sexism and racism to be a thing of the past, that is what's going to really happen. That's what's going to change these power structures that are holding people back from that real change, right? That is what's holding back, but people just don't realize that. But I think we're on the right trajectory to it. But again, nothing ever works fast enough. We're always frustrated with the
It's going too slow.
Yeah, exactly.
But I also don't blame people for not wanting to wake up to it, because paying attention to the issues in politics is just a nightmare and is going to make you sad.
So boring.
You're going to be sad or mad.
Yeah, like me.
100% of the time you look at the news.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I tell people. I say, don't look at the news. Turn the news off, right? Find other places. Find people that you really enjoy listening to, right? Like,
but they're depressing too.
Yeah, true. Well, look at me talking about all this stuff. This is depressing too, but that's why I try and highlight the optimism of it, of the things that are changing, right? Because I think it is a daunting thing to look at, but I think there's hope, right? But I think it'd be detrimental to the cause to be too optimistic about it and not show that it is a daunting thing and it's and there's a lot of people, there's a lot of power standing in the way, but it's not unseatable, right? Rome fell.
You totally have to make sure that things are moving forward,
right?
Or you have a plan to make them move forward so that people see hope and have an idea of what they could accomplish if they care.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I talk about this a lot, of like just giving people a taste of their own potential. I feel like that is the biggest thing you can do for people, is just showing them a little piece of what they can do opens up that door to like seeing their potential, because I think there's amazing potential in everybody. I think there's just a lot of things. Life is hard and it makes it really hard for them to realize what they have within them. And I think the more we can kind of spread that message of like, no, you can do anything you want. If you really put your mind to it and you really try, you can, right? There's a lot of things that are unfair and in the way, but just that message and just finding little ways you can do it. Like, that's what it's kind of like the dodgeball thing, right? Like, just people have these narratives in their head. I'm not athletic. I can't do this, right? But just having some sort of system that gives them that little piece of, hey, maybe I can do this. And I didn't ever think I could play sports, but this is not that bad. I'm having fun. I might not be good at it, but then you see what happens. And somebody comes in, I saw this a million times. You probably saw it too. Somebody comes in first year, they say, I'm not going to play. Like, you guys go down and play. I don't want to play. The second year, say, come, it's really fun. You can sit on the side, just come and watch. You don't even have to play. Like, we'll just mess around. If you want to try it once, you can. And they come in and they maybe aren't the best for that first year, but then they really enjoy it. And that means a lot to them. They got some camaraderie. They come back the next year. And they're half decent. They're actually, by the end of that year, they're pretty good. They come back third year and they are amazing. And they've just figured it out. They stuck with it for 2 years and now they're great at it and they love it. And it lights them up. You can see the look in their face that they've never experienced this before. They've got to watch people have the adulation of sport for all their life and they never thought that was something they could do. And then they do. And you see that it gives them confidence, right? Like, I'm sure me and you both can name some people right now that had way different confidence purely from dodgeball. Like, I think you can, and dodgeball and what Lister was, and the freedom to find who you are. I think that also, you can't discount that as well. But it's an amazing thing, that little piece of potential, just showing them that like you are worth something. You have that within you. You can do whatever you want. That is so powerful. And I think more things that do that, the better the world's going to be. Right. And I feel like, again, that kind of scares people, because I don't think the way the system is set up to keep people down, they don't want people waking up to what they can do. They want you to just, no, you don't push the limits. Just go to your job, work every day, get your pension, retire. That's that narrative that's been going for so long. And they don't want that to break. That's what keeps them all in jobs. That's what keeps them all making billions of dollars a year, is that idea itself, where that idea might work for everybody, but the idea that that's the only thing you can do, and to don't try and shoot for more than that, because that's for other people. That's for special people, right? Like, you're not going to be that person. You just go to work and do the standard. That's for special people. Everybody's special people. They just realize that they just believe in themselves. The only thing separating you from that person doing those amazing things that you look up to is that they believe they can do it, right? And I think that is the message that needs to be sent. And that's the message that you don't see on social media, really. You don't see on news. You don't see it anywhere. The only place I started hearing that message, and the way I'm repeating it, was when I found podcasts. As soon as I graduated, I started listening to podcasts, and I started hearing this. Oh yeah, you can do that. Got a lot more belief in myself. Started changing a lot of things, started working out, started doing all these things, and really changed my life around. I was like, oh yeah, you can do it. And now I want to spread that message to other people. I want people listening to this to hear, oh, well, if that's all it is, I just got to believe that I can do it, and I can maybe make some change and try it and start small, clean my room, take a cold shower, whatever it is, try something I'm scared to do, like, that is huge. That'll pay dividends in so many ways and help you in so many areas, right? Like, it's funny to see too, because then it all feedbacks into other areas of your life too, whereas you do this one thing in one area and now you're better at work, right? And then you start doing better at work and now you're better with your relationships. Like it's all about just starting to get that positive momentum, and momentum is important.
Everything always comes back to dodgeball.
It always comes back to dodgeball. We knew that a long time ago, didn't we, Jen? Oh, good times.
Imagine if you started a podcast back then.
I think about that every fucking day, Jen. I think about that every fucking day. Imagine if I started a podcast back in Lister, and I think about like, man, like all the comedians that would have come through that I could have just went through that are at the Horowitz and stuff and tried to, I'm just a university, so you want to come on my podcast? Like, oh, no, that is what I fantasize all about. I'm so happy that I started it, but also the fact that I knew for so long that I wanted to start one, but I was just too scared, and I would just sit around like fantasizing about ways like all those special people that can do podcasts. They're special. That's not me, because I didn't believe I could do it or whatever. And it just took that like, oh, I just got to try. And then if you just keep trying and don't give up, eventually it'll go somewhere. It might not ever get to those highs that you see it, right? Because in my head of what I want to take this, if I told you, you create, I'll tell you a couple of things of ideas I have after this that'll probably make your head spin. But even if I don't achieve those, just if I help one person, that's awesome, right? If I can bring the happiness that this brings to me, I love doing this. I haven't felt happiness like I did when I started this podcast for a long time, probably since Lister, because that was probably the happiest 4 years of my life. Even with all that other stuff that we talked about.
All the nonsense.
Yeah, all the nonsense. But even with all that, it was still the best time of my life. I've never enjoyed, partied, had relationships, friends. And I think it was also something that I was just thinking about this week, actually, of something that made it so special to me is I feel like people always talk about introverts and extroverts. And I can never decide what I am, because I'm clearly extroverted. I like attention. I like these things, but I also need alone time. And I loved Lister because I had my little room and I could go there and I could recuperate and I could be on my own and nobody would bug me. But then when I ran out of that, I need to see some people. I could walk downstairs and I'd run into people I know. I always had that I could be an introvert or extrovert at my beck and call whenever I wanted. Now I moved to GP and I don't get the extroverted side of me. I get all the introverted feel I get, right? Of just being at home alone. Well, now that Alyssa lives with me, it's a little bit different. I'm around people, but then that's the other part of it now. I go to work, I'm around people. I come home, I'm around her. I don't have my alone time now. And now I find myself, I just made that realization probably a couple of weeks ago that was a source of some unhappiness. I need to find some true alone time. And I just didn't recognize that. And then I did. I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like that was probably a big reason of why I was so happy there, right? Like I had that. And it's just about having the space to think about what you need, right? And that's why I love meditation so much. I find so much when I meditate, it just gives me that slows everything down and has a space for those ideas just to pop up of what you need or what you've been too busy to notice, right? And I really enjoy that. And
yeah, I'm sort of the same way, but with the pandemic and I live alone, I very rarely see people.
Right. And how many people do you think are going through that right now?
Yeah. And I lived in Edmonton 3 years ago,
right.
But so I'm sort of new.
Yeah.
I still have some friends in the city, but it's hard.
Yeah. And even those friends, like, it depends, like, almost the unnecessary, like, you probably want to see people, but now you have to, if you want to go see somebody, you have to now do a computation in your head of how much worth it is that to me to now judge if this person is okay with seeing me. Are they, how scared of COVID are they? Is that going to put them in a rough spot that they want to see me, but they're worried, right? Like there's so much added into it that it just makes it almost like I'm not even going to try. Or I'm speaking of myself right now. I was like, I'm so worried about what people are going to think if they want to come. Same with having people on the podcast. I'm almost worried to ask because I don't know. And that's why I like saying like, we can do it in person or online, like whatever you want. Right. And I probably said that to you the first 3-4 times I asked you, right? Like, because I'm so worried about putting them out. But I feel like for so many people that are like us, they probably don't even try, which is sad because you need to see people. Human connection is so important. And I feel like that is one of the biggest parts of this pandemic that we've really missed. And I feel like for society so focused on being on the right side of history, there's going to be some people that look back in a couple of years and go, what the hell did we do? Like that was so bad. And who was in charge? Who made these calls? Like who allowed this to go on? And every time I see them talk about going back to those same things that they tried and we've seen the consequences of for a year now. And we're not going to try anything different. We're just going to go back to those same things that just cause all this pain and heartache. Like,
yeah, I feel like what we're doing is exactly what we shouldn't be doing.
100%.
Either you
100%.
Lock down absolutely everything, get rid of every case.
That's the only way that
COVID like they did in New Zealand and
that's the
Australia.
only way lockdowns work.
Or you just wing it.
Exactly. But in wing it, there's a way to wing it that works, right? You wing it where you educate people and, okay, we're winging it. Things are going to be open, but you have to now the way I think about how I would like is to have everything open to a degree. Maybe there's some things that are just too ridiculous to have open. You
probably shouldn't go to a nightclub.
Right. That's kind of what I'm thinking, right? Where you're breathing, you're sweating, like that is one of those things where it's like, that is just so high risk. We might have to get rid of those. But everything that like is a step down from that is somewhat, but even like, because the way I look at it is, for myself, it was with the pandemic, I wouldn't risk, like, even if everything was open, I wouldn't go do a bunch of the stuff that I normally would. I wouldn't walk around like things were all normal. I would still only do the things that really meant a lot to me. And that's the way I did it, even when things are closed, right? Like I stopped going to the gym, which I really like. I stopped doing a couple other things, right? But what I didn't stop was this podcast. You're sitting in front of me, so obviously that's true. Because that meant, the podcast means so much to me that I'm willing to take that risk. I'm still gonna be smart about it. I'm still gonna, take precautions, but that is my one thing. But now what is that one thing for everybody? Maybe that one thing for you is, jujitsu. Say that jujitsu is your life. That is what makes you happy. That is the thing that gets you out of bed in the morning. But now they're all closed down, right? And it's not like they have an option just to go do it on their own. They don't have that. But now there's so many things that people have their thing, that if you left everything open and educated people to the point where you don't go out and do other things, but whatever's really meaningful to you, you can still do it, and you're taking that risk, right? And now I think that would be a much happier society. It's still, and even when you go do those things, let's put things in place to try and make it as safe as possible, right? Let's have extra cleaning ramped up. Let's have some social distancing if you can, right? Can't social distance jujitsu, right? That's just not happening. But you understand that, and you're taking that risk. And maybe they clean the mats extra and they do those things, and maybe they make the class sizes smaller and run more. Like, there's ways to do this. But again, those are hard. People want the easy way out. So the easiest way is just say, no, we're closing everything.
Yeah.
How we don't have to do any work. It's easy. Everyone's forces. But now I think the only thing that's going to stop, I think we gave them the permission that is okay, because everyone went along with it. But now the only way it's going to stop is people start to raise their displeasure with it, right? Which is what I see. And what's unfortunate is now everybody's so in that social media, like, tattletale mode that, like, it makes it difficult. People are so scared, not of the virus, but of living their life and getting caught, or some of their neighbors seeing them. Like, that is a terrible society to live in, where you're more worried about, getting tattletaled on by your neighbors than you are of, like, the actual thing that we're supposed to be scared of. Like, that is not a good place to be.
Yeah.
How did we end up here?
Maybe you didn't have a job for 6 months, and then now you're worried about getting a $1,500 ticket.
Yeah.
That you can't pay.
Yeah.
That's insane.
I know. It's crazy. And to me, I don't think those $1,500 tickets, any of them are going to pass. I thoroughly believe that once the courts catch up and they start fighting those, and the public, and when you say your story of, like, hey, I was doing everything right, I was being smart, and I didn't put anybody at risk, and they still gave me a ticket, they're not going to fight. And then they're all going to get thrown. I have a real suspicion that a huge chunk of those are all going to get thrown out, and that they're just using that as a scare tactic to keep people in line. And I don't think that's healthy. I don't think that's right. I think that's morally reprehensible. But the only way to do that is for those brave people to do that. Every time I see a video of those people saying, like, oh, you need a code, they say, no, we don't. Well, no, yeah, no, give me my $1,500 ticket, I'll take it. And they do it and they drive off. That just fills my heart, because I think without those people doing that, and don't get me wrong, I want them to do it respectfully, and most of the people that are doing, they are, and if they're going to be a prick about it and yell and scream, I don't really support it. But I think unless people start, and those people that have been opening up their restaurants, they're like, if you look in northern Alberta, like in Lacrete, there was people months and months ago, the first one saying, like, I'm not closing down, because they are a very religious culture. They have very strong morals and values. And they were taking those tickets and saying, no, this is my family business. I've had it open. I'm opening up. Right. And I respect the fuck out of that. And I think that's the only thing that's going to push us to this middle ground. I think if nobody pushes back, they're just going to keep going further and further to this way of this kind of this path that we're on. And that doesn't mean I'm that person that says we don't need to believe in COVID. We don't need to go full Florida, but I think that we need people to stand up to push us more to a middle ground where we're still being smart, but we aren't putting people in these positions where they're so unhappy, and that suicide's on the rise, and mental health is just, you want to talk a pandemic. Mental health is a pandemic right now. Like, everybody, like, even the strongest people, like even myself, who I thought was, untouchable mentally, right? I've been struggling, and what I think of that is now, man, if I'm struggling, I can't imagine what some people are going through, because I have an amazing life. I have nothing, just, this is tough on me and my life is so amazing. Like imagine somebody that's struggling to put food on the table and now they're going through that. Oh, my heart breaks for them.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
Yeah.
Especially in smaller places like that where there's maybe 500 people, you're so far away.
Yeah.
Nobody from any big city wants to go there because they usually suck. Why do they need to be closed?
Exactly.
Because the province is too lazy to give to regions.
Exactly. And that's exactly what it comes to, is the laziness that they don't want to. There's nuance that could have happened from the start. There's nuance all over it, but nuance is tantamount to effort, right? That's what it means. And they don't want to do effort. They want the easiest way out, even if it means huge strife and what's the word? Like suffering. When you listen to people like Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson talk about what the world is and their views of, religion and what it comes to, and they say like of trying to take all the dogma out of religion and find the core of what it is, and it's suffering, right? And the elimination, either working towards suffering or away from suffering. That's what everything breaks down to. And when you see people that through their laziness of not wanting to do that, they're adding suffering on, that is hell. That is like the biblical portions of the stories they're trying to tell, and they have all these, depending on your beliefs, make believe or whatever, but they're just allegories to try and tell these stories. And it's about that. Like heaven and hell aren't a real place in the sky and thing on the ground. It's something on earth of like, and that's what their ideas and that's their interpretation of it. But I think it's pretty strong of like where we're going towards or away from suffering. And when you see people, that is doing, this is going to sound really silly, but that's doing the devil's work, right? Like in that sense, that's bringing people to suffering where suffering is going to happen. Life is suffering. It's hard. You're going to suffer, but what's the word they use? Unintentional suffering, unnecessary suffering, right? Like the unnecessary suffering. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Jen. Right? Like that is what we need to be moving away from. And that's what I see right now is there's so much suffering that could be eliminated that is just through nothing but laziness and alone. And people it's laziness and being afraid to take some risk. Every other politician isn't taking some risk and they're not doing it. I'm just going to follow suit, right? Okay. If nobody steps out, if nobody's the first against the wall, then none of us have to do it. Whereas now you look at the states and there's, like Governor DeSantis in Florida. And again, not saying that this is the perfect representation, but I respect that more than of them saying, you know what, you guys are all adults. We're not locking anything down. We're not putting any rules in place. You can put whatever is going to make you feel comfortable, you do. And now they have that. So now that puts pressure. So now you see Florida that does that. And then you see California that has some of the most strict, ridiculous laws that is locking this stuff down, and their numbers are almost identical. And now that is a much different situation than Canada, where pretty much nobody's stepped up. Nobody's that Governor DeSantis. Alberta's probably the closest to it but even us, it's so close to every other province. Now that gives accountability. Now there's no other factors, right? Like there's no Floridas and Canada for people to say like, hey, why can't we do that? Like, this is an option too. And I think that is just cowardice, right? Like it's just that everyone's so scared to be the first one to step out, that to break rank, that they'll allow suffering to take place on their watch. And that just disgusts me, right? Like that keeps me up at night, that's happening right now. And I feel like that's the frustration that people are having. And I feel like even to have the conversation like this, and this is what I love about a podcast, we have so much time that we can have this conversation and probably not get labeled with all this stuff because we can back it up and nuance it. But now you say it on social media or come out with it, now everybody jumps on you because they automatically think you're, a COVID denier or any of these things, right? And, I know a lot of COVID deniers, like, and they frustrate me just as much as these people that think that this
everything should be locked down.
Yeah, like this is the bubonic plague, and that it is like there's a middle ground there, but I don't think either side is good. There's nuance to everything that is there. It's just you have to give some effort. It seems like nobody wants to give some effort anymore in a lot of areas, but I don't know. Again, I'm optimistic that is changing. I feel like everyone I've talked to lately is so sick of it. I haven't talked to one person that supports what's going on.
Yeah, well, especially now that older people that want the vaccine are getting vaccinated. 100%. Not to say that there aren't young people who get it and have really bad side effects for a long time. And that
biodiversity is a hell of a drug.
But you have to think about kids and being in school and how important that is for them, or even just regular people like you and me and seeing friends and family and how important that is.
For sure.
It's awful to say, but maybe it's worth it.
It is, right? Like I think it's awful to say in some circles, but I think for the most part, like, and that's what I'm saying. Like, I feel like everybody I've talked to in real life that isn't on the internet has said the same thing. Everybody says this, like, hey, I still want to be smart, but this is too much. And it's like, how can I haven't run into anybody in the last 6 months that has said anything other, But on the internet, it seems like it's different, and the politicians seems it's different. But it's like, how can we have that much of a disconnect from what's really happening in the real world to what actionable things are happening? It blows my mind that is allowed, or that it can carry on.
Yeah, like I wouldn't say that in front of somebody who is our age and needs to get a kidney transplant or something. Like that obviously sucks.
Yeah.
But instead of making everybody socially distance, why don't we support those people in socially distancing so that they can be safe and their health matters, and then our health also matters. Yeah. Because mental health is health.
It is. It's almost
it directly connects to your physical health.
And that's what you see. So many people have actual physical maladies that are 100% because of their mental health, right? When you look at the power of placebo and nocebo, it will blow your mind. I'm sure in nursing you probably talk about it all the time, but I think people don't fully understand. I'm sure everybody knows what a placebo is, but you don't realize when you read some stories of what that power, the power of the mind, of what it can do, it's amazing. So now when somebody is in a bad mental place, that can manifest itself in cancer. That can manifest itself in IBS and all these things that are physical issues that you're taxing the healthcare system with, but all stem from their mental health, right? There's so much of it. And another piece of this that just gets me so fired up is the fact that there's been one strategy that's okay to talk about. And if you bring up any other one, like to me, right away, I started looking into rapid testing and why we weren't investing more into it. And the story I kept hearing, right? The narrative of what they're saying was they're not reliable and stuff. But then you look into it and there's like, no, there's some, like right away, there were some pretty good ones that were like 96% plus effective, costing less than $3 a test. And you could even do it where like a family of four could all swab their mouths, put it in this thing, and if it tests positive, now all four of them go for a whatever test you want to do. What's that one? PCR test, if you want.
Yeah.
Now, if we put just, let's say, half of the money we've invested in so much of this COVID recovery, take half that money and invest it towards rapid testing. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't, that vaccines, but now if you bring up anything that isn't vaccines is a solution. If you say anything else like rapid testing, you are labeled with all these things, they jump on you. And whenever they stop conversation, because I love conversation, I love asking questions. As soon as I see people jumping on and saying, you can't talk about that, that's taboo, my red flags go up and I'm immediately, so then I look more into it. And there's some real questionable stuff going on right now. And I think still to this day, like the fact that COVID's probably gonna be around for a long time, we're going to get vaccines and stuff. But if we were to today still, like obviously I would prefer of this to happen 6 months ago so that we're starting to see the results now. But even today, I still think if we need to invest into rapid testing, because if we had done it 6 months ago and now, like you could go, like when I go down to the States, we went down to the States for Christmas. I know I'm a terrible person. Oh, I'm the worst, right? I should go die in a hole. But we could go for $100, we could go for a rapid test in our car and have the results in 20 minutes. That was such a game changer to realize, like, if we had that in every town, where even if it wasn't, because if you start investing it, like I said, they only cost $3, right? Like if you invest heavily and you subsidize it, you could have it where anybody for $10 you can get tested. And now if it's $10 for a test, you think, who's a big company? I don't want to use my big company. I'm trying to think of another one. It's the only one that comes to my head. You're Rexall. I don't know. You think Rexall is not going to invest money so that, you know how much money they lose when a store goes down and they have to isolate all their players and have to close down? They would pay some money to be able to test their vet, right? Like there's all these things that you could do. And now we're in a much different place. Now COVID isn't that scary. If you know, the only thing that's scary about COVID is that it's that you could be spreading it and not knowing it. You could be, that was the biggest part. That is the biggest fear thing. But that rapid testing where you take away that piece of it, where the unknown, and now this is a way different disease. This is a way different pandemic. If we have widespread access to rapid testing, it's completely different. Still need to do all the vaccines. We can still do that. That's good long-term. But now the fact that you couldn't even bring that up, or if you did bring that up, you were demonized, and that just, I have some real questions about why that is. And I think after this, there's going to have to be some real investigation into the powers that be, and that was forcing things that PCR tests are the only tests that work. And it's the only tests that are kind of, if you want to, like, I'm not saying that they are fucking with PCR tests. I think that goes down the conspiracy route. I don't want to say that, but the only kind of test that is gameable and that you can fuck with and change the dynamics and change how many cycles you run it for is that PCR test. And that's the only one they let you. That is questionable to me. Like, okay, you can only use the one test that you can fuck with is the only test we value. It's like, I don't know. I don't want to say that there's conspiracy things going on, but the fact that they're stopping people from even asking those questions is really sketchy to me. I think there's some weirdness going on there. I don't know what it is, and I don't want to dive into it, but it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up.
And then people start making up just nonsense.
Nonsense. Like they're putting microchips in people and shit.
And then the tests only have 50% reliability. It's like, what?
Where did you get
They
that?
do like 15,000 tests a day. 50% of them had false positives. It'd be like 7,500 cases a day.
Exactly.
Not 500.
But now I think a big piece of that is exactly why that bullshit's popping up is because they shut down the conversation. Okay. So there's some legitimate questions about PCR tests that need to be asked. But now you prevent people from asking those questions, and now they're just going to run with it. They put their tinfoil hat on because now we can't discuss it like adults. You say we're not adult enough to have this discussion. They're going to have it on their own in their little dungeons or in the dark places of the internet, and they're going to come out with this bullshit. And that's where it comes out. That's what brings all this stuff to bear is the subjugation of the conversation. And I feel like that is my point. It's just whatever we decide, we just need to be able to discuss it. We need to be able to have conversations about it. You can't restrict. Like, free speech is so important in so many areas. And I feel like you almost get labeled with stuff just by saying you support free speech these days, which is so backwards to me because that's the bedrock that almost our entire society is built upon is free speech. That is what, you want to end racism, you want to end sexism. Free speech is your biggest tool you have, right? Like, why are you attacking that? That is what, attacking free speech is the biggest thing holding people down, right? Like of the dissolvement of free speech is the biggest thing propagating racism and sexism these days. And then you see these people that in holding the flag of fighting racism and sexism, they're attacking free speech. It's like, how is this happening? Like it's one of those things that just drives me up the wall. And I'm hoping that conversations like this where you can talk with the nuance and just ask these questions is going to wake more people up to it. Maybe somebody that had that idea in your head that PCR tests are only 50% effective because they heard that somewhere and kind of stuck with it. Maybe this conversation, okay, so PCR tests, like there might be some questions that need to be asked, but it's not 50% effective. It's not that, right? It's never one side or the other. It's always somewhere in the middle, but it seems like when you can't have those conversations to find that middle ground, people are just going to go to one end or the other, whatever fits their narrative, whatever team they're on, they're going to go to that side because you didn't like to have the conversation to find the objective truth. It's like there's this attack on objective truth and they don't want that to have everything subjective, right? It's kind of the postmodern ideas of everything subjective, but you need to have some data. You need math. You need science. Like there's some things that you need that society needs to have agreement upon for things to function. And when you attack that, things really start to spiral. And I feel like that's what we're seeing is that there's not allowed to have conversation on some of these things. And it just brings so much worse to bear. Like I think they're, and I don't think it's that conspiratorial. I think it's just them. I think it's more them treating us like children. Like, oh, you guys can't have these conversations. We'll have these conversations. You're not even allowed to talk about it because they're worried that people will see that and go, they see any dissenting conversation as these crazy conspiracy theorists and they label it all with that, but it's not. There's definitely some of that, don't get me wrong, but I think the efforts to try and shut that down just makes it worse. It's the Barbra Streisand effect, right? When you try and stop people from being able to say that or be able to read these, when you pull these things off YouTube, that just makes people dig harder for them. They're going to find it. It's the internet. You can't you're never going to be successful at that, but that gives it validity. They're giving validity to these crazy conspiracy theories by not letting us have conversations where it's going to find the middle ground. It won't go all the way to that edge because we're going to have adults in the room that say, come on guys, let's grow up. That definitely what they're saying isn't right, but it's not that. Like we'll find a place in the middle, and that's what's going to bring things forward. So I hope that, and that's what gives me optimism, is that there are brave people like the Weinstein, Brett and Heather Weinstein. They're both evolutionary biologists and they have a podcast and they started it in the podcast to talk about these types of things. And they've been an amazing source of information, scientific information, that they've been reading studies and helping people out and arming them with information. That's where I got most of this and how I understand so many of these things. And then when they said something they found was wrong or new information comes out, they would start everybody, hey, like 2 episodes ago, we said that, sunlight kills the virus, 100%, right? Which was a thing that came out, and they said, no, that is incorrect. It has some effect, but they're finding that it's a different kind of range of UV, that sunlight, but more so what they're finding out and they're saying it doesn't change. Why? Because they were saying like, everybody go outside, get outside as much as you can, right? Sunlight is great and all this stuff. And, they're saying still go outside. There was still, because why they thought it was sunlight that was killing it all was because they sound like infection rates are so low outside, like almost immutable, right? Like they're nothing. And they thought that was the sunlight that was doing it. But what they found is actually what's more so happening is just there's so much air around you that it just, as soon as you breathe out, it materializes into such a vast amount of air. It's not contained by any sort of building or anything, that it's not the sunlight. So they said, we still stand by what we're saying, everybody get outside, but now it's for a different reason. And I love that, because they were saying, like, they're fine with saying, hey, we were wrong. We thought this was the information we had at that point, but we're going to start right up front. We were wrong. This is how we do things. But then you hear something like that and you go, okay, so it almost transfers negative outside. Why do we have restrictions of 10 people gatherings outside then? Why didn't we say 10 people gatherings inside, let her buck outside, or 100 people outside, or just make it change to make the rules accurately reflect the science so that people can learn, right? Like, I don't know.
First of all, how dare you use free speech to say stuff like crazy?
Fair enough. I'm gonna get brutalized.
Second of all, what if there's a variant that comes out that isn't blocked by the vaccine? They say that we'll just wait for another vaccine as a booster, and it's like, I ain't fucking waiting another year for a vaccine.
No shit. Exactly. And if that's the thinking,
you shove that right up your ass.
No shit. And this is where I'm saying I go back to rapid testing. So now a variant comes up. So now these vaccines. So now this 8 months that we had to prepare and have rapid testing, which is the solution. Like, in my head, the fact that people think vaccines is a solution, rapid testing is not, absolutely astounds me. Every person that I respect that is intelligent has said this. Elon Musk, right? Lex Friedman, all these people are saying, why are we investing? Like, vaccines for sure, we have to do that too. I'm not trying to demean that, but what's much better and is a much more long-term solution, because this is going to be with us for a while, is rapid testing on a wide scale for cheap, right? And now the economy's in the shitter. You don't think you could have a whole new economy, a whole new industry of this rapid testing that would make people money and get people back in jobs? Like, it's such a no-brainer that it almost seems like it has to be either the most incompetence we've ever seen in the entire world or something fishy's happening, right? And to me, the fact that one of the biggest political donors is the medical system and big pharma, the ones that are making these vaccines, and the vaccines are the only option. And now these rapid testing is kind of a different area where they don't have their fingers in that pie. And now they demonize anybody that brings up rapid testing and support anybody that wants to say vaccines. There's some funny business there, right? Like, I don't want to go down a conspiracy theory road. I'm just saying there's some questions that need to be asked there. There's some real wacky incentives that, if they're not happening, I'd be surprised, right? Like, it's just one of those things. But now to bring that up, unless you're on a place where you can cover yourself and show how you got to these things, where you have enough time, you have as many hours as we want, we can sit here to really fully flush this out. You just get labeled with it, right? And I feel like that is why they're so scared of long form podcasts, and they're trying to demonize it, and they're trying to say that, this misinformation, it's spreading on podcasts now. Because, people are having nuanced conversations. That scares them. They don't want that. They want vaccines is the only solution. If you say anything else, you're crazy, right? Like, it's like, I don't know.
Maybe I'm crazy.
Yeah, maybe I'm crazy. Then I'll take it. I mean, bananas. We're bananas. We're not crazy.
I like bananas.
Me too. It's one of my favorite words.
Like, not eating them. I hate eating bananas, which I think makes saying, wow, that's bananas, so much better.
There you go. Bananas. I don't mind bananas. I'll eat them. I just don't. I don't eat that healthy anyway. I need to bring more bananas into my diet.
Yuck.
But I think we really covered that, and I'm sure it'll probably come up again. And that's the thing. I love this conversation. I'm so passionate about this, and it's something that I want to talk about. But I feel like people listening probably want to get away from COVID and that. But I'm hoping, like, the only thing I can do with this podcast is just follow what interests me and what I'm passionate about. I'm passionate about this, and I'm interested in it, and I have some questions, so it keeps coming up. But I feel bad. I'm like, I wonder how many people listen to this, and every time COVID comes up, they just turn it off because they think of that. Yeah, exactly. Because I feel like, but almost every time it comes up, I feel like I'm allowed to. Because I'm also figuring this stuff out on the fly and talking with you. That's how I do my best thinking, is with somebody testing my ideas and to bounce it off of, right? And I feel like through that process, I feel like that is what opens people up to these ideas and arms them now when, somebody is giving them shit about, like, their ideas. You can say, no, like, here's some couple good arguments that I'm armed with now to combat that, right? So that you try and label it that, no, this is why I think this way. This is the evidence. This is the weird incentives that are lining up that are making me think this way. And, like, that's just my belief, and whatever you want to believe, that's fine. But this is what I believe, and this is how I got to that decision. And I feel like if we don't have that and we shut down that's a scary place to live in. That's where all the darkness starts. When you look at, Germany in the late 30s, when you look at Russia before there, the first thing that happened was the taking away of free speech and making certain subjects taboo and you can't talk about. Before, the worst things in the world that have ever happened leading up to everyone is exactly what you see is happening now, which is terrifying, right? And it scares me. And I feel like it should scare a lot more people. And I feel like, I don't know, I hope that every time I get so upset, like when they made that rule change with the hotels and putting people in those, like, that is awful. But in the back of my head, I go, maybe that's what will push people over the edge. They were on board for everything, but you're going to put people in these hotels with non-governmental private security forces. Like, maybe that makes them feel a little bit of heebie-jeebies. Maybe that's what makes them question a couple more things, right? It's like, you almost, as much as it sucks to see things get worse, you hope that, okay, well, maybe it needs to get worse for people to realize it, right? And that's kind of what's keeping me optimistic. That's my optimistic way of looking at some of these things that really scare me, is like, hopefully this is just them, like they'll just step one step too far and people will revolt and say, hey, like, you guys we need some new people in power. You guys are fucked. Like, this is scary. I don't like what you guys are doing, but I don't know if that'll happen.
Yeah, I don't like those hotel things. Usually you had to have a test to even come in. Negative.
Yep.
Mind you, there are countries that are going to be like, okay, here's your papers.
Yeah.
So that's obviously not good. But I heard this one story where this guy who had type 1 he was type 2 diabetic. I was thinking in my head, this person would have died if he was type 1.
Yeah.
He had type 2 diabetes, and you're supposed to have your meals delivered to your room so that you don't have to leave.
Right.
And it had been like 12 hours and this guy hadn't been fed.
Wow.
And he's a diabetic.
Yeah.
So managing your glucose levels is super important.
For sure.
And I was thinking, if this person was a type 1 diabetic and they took this rule seriously where they were not allowed to leave the room, they literally could have died.
Yeah. That's wild, hey?
Yeah.
And the fact that doesn't cause more of a ruckus is wild to me too. I feel like those things are wild themselves, and the fact that they just happen and nobody bats an eye, that is also just as wild to me with so many of these things. That's like it's like a double whammy. Every time you see something crazy, it's crazy to you, bananas to you, but then
it's bananas.
But then it's even more bananas that nobody bats an eye on it and they're just eating it up. It's like, holy man, I don't know what's going on out there. I don't know what people have been fed to get to that point where they're that believing, that gullible, right? And
like, how is this story not all over the place?
Right. But I think it comes back to that you have to put some effort in to look at that, where it's easier just to close your eyes, put your plug your ears and go la 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 la,
totally.
and don't even listen to it, because that's the easy way out. And again, our entire education system, everything has taught people that that's what it is. There's always going to be an easy road. If you ever see, two options, there's always going to be an easy one and a hard one, right? And there's not a lot of consequence. I think for a long time, that's always existed. There's always going to be an easy way out, even when life was hard. Even if you turn the clock back 100 years and it's 1920, there's still easy way outs. But back then, life, you would see the consequences so clearly. If you always took the easy way out, you would not survive. You wouldn't make it. Where now you can take the easy way out all the way, and society is such that you'll still get by. Like, even if you take the easy way out all the time, you can still scrape a living together. You can still survive, right? And I feel like that's the big change. Now we've gotten to a point where society has gotten so far that by never opening your eyes, never involving yourself, never, seeing life for all that it has to offer, and just keeping yourself narrowed down to your small slice that affects you, you can survive in that. Whereas never before in history could you, right? If there's these things going on, you had to get involved, right? If the Huns are coming over the hill, you can't just, I'm just going to keep farming and nothing's happening because you get your head chopped off. Nowadays, it's like,
that was easy. My head's off.
Yeah, exactly, right? That's the easy way. But the consequences for the easy way out were a lot different. The consequences for everything are different now, and a lot less, which is great. And that's amazing. You want society to get to that point, and that's what helps people bring it up. But also it opens the door to people to take advantage of that fact and reap all the rewards and hoard all the gold for themselves and take advantage of that, because nobody's going to stand up, nobody's going to speak anything. They'll just, it doesn't really affect them that directly. We'll give them just enough so that they're happy enough so that they don't revolt. Or if they do start to get upset and they do, start, like we saw with Black Lives Matter, when they took to the streets and showed their displeasure with what's been going on. Okay, now we need to co-opt that and make it a different fight. We need to deflect off of that and get them upset about something else. You see the tactics, and it's once you wake up to it, you can see it everywhere, and it's very obvious too, but you can't blame people for not. Like, you've been taught your whole life that you don't have to do it. Just keep your eyes on what you're working on and you'll be fine, right? That's the narrative.
And heed to authority.
Yeah, heed to authority. Don't question. Don't question. That is the biggest thing, right? And that's exactly how I think that starts in the education system, right? Like, that's what it is. Don't question. That's why I got in shit so much in school just for questioning it. Why do we do that? Like teachers probably hated me. You know what I mean? Like I was that kid that was, well, why are we doing that? I was always that person, always through it. And, and
the teachers don't want to answer that question. No. And I understand that being a teacher would suck and it's hard. Mm-hmm. Sorry to anybody who's a teacher out there. I'm sure you love it. Mm-hmm. But why, kids are annoying.
I think
I couldn't handle answering the question why all the time either.
600 times a day, right? Like, yeah, exactly.
For everything. Why do I have to put the water bottle lid back on my water bottle?
Yeah. And that's the thing. I agree. And I think that's what it is. But I feel like there's also other issues where there are certain people that can handle that and would be good for that. But I think a lot of the time we don't value education is one of the most important things, and teachers are one of our most important things. But the way we value it, like both financially and just societally, of where in the pecking order of where we see teachers, really, like it's like, doctor, lawyer, blah, 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 blah. And you get pretty far down before you get teacher. Yeah. When if you ask anybody and make them actually think of it, not just take that's what society says, but if you actually ask, like if I asked you what you think of teachers and how important that role is, you would move that up a bunch of steps, right? It'd be up there with the doctors and the lawyers. But you have to have the realities of the world match that for the results to come, right? We need to pay them more. We need to make it more respectful. We need to make the schooling way fucking harder. I know that, I feel like I get teachers on my side by saying they need all this respect. And then I say, and the schooling needs to be harder. And then, hey, what? I didn't see that. But that's also a big piece of this is, no offense, but an education degree is one of the easiest degrees you can get. I know that is mean, and I know that's going to hurt some people's feelings, but it is. And I think there's probably a lot of teachers that would agree with that and that say that they value. So now, how many people do we know in university that were in other degrees, didn't cut it, and went into ed?
Yeah,
I could probably name about 40.
A lot of people. I think it maybe not easier, but requires different skills.
Yes, it requires skills.
But you don't need to necessarily have those skills to be able to pass an ed degree.
Right. Yeah, I think you're very right. I really appreciate that, because I feel like I've been saying this argument a lot and using easier, and you're right. It's not easier. It's requiring different things. And I feel like, but that's what happens is now one of our close friends, I don't know if you're going to know who I'm talking about, but he went into ed, and he doesn't have those types of things that you need in that space, like the patience, the love of the kids, all those things, but he could still pass a degree and get that degree. And then he gets into it and he's very unhappy, doesn't like it. And now he might find something else, but now the kids are the ones that pay for that at that point, right? Because now we've set up the system so that can happen, right? If we valued the system and had the teachers that value, if you made more and the schooling was harder and only those people that went into it really wanted to do it and really had those values and wanted to teach those kids, right? I'm sure there's so many people that would be amazing teachers, but because of the lack of respect that it gets, they wouldn't do it. They're those perfect people. I feel like there's so many people, like I almost think that nursing and teaching have a lot of those similar traits. There's also a lot of different traits. And like you say, there's specializations of nursing that require different things, but I think there's probably so many people that would be amazing teachers and might like teaching a little bit more, but there's so much more respect and money and so many other things in nursing that they would go there. Where I feel like if you bring the respect and the money up of teaching, it will bring in those people. It would, like, to me, I might have been a teacher. I like teaching, but all I heard of teaching, and again, I was so focused on money for most of my life that, they don't make no money. That was every job I thought about when I was looking at jobs. The first thing I looked at, how much money do they make? Because I wanted to be, what I wanted to be, an underwater welder. Because we did a class where you look at all these jobs that you could have, and the highest one was underwater welder. I don't like scuba diving. I'm not buying water.
You ever weld before?
No, right? Like, well, at that point I hadn't, right? I have since then. I burnt the fuck out of my hand like an idiot, but welding Beersby poles for Big Valley. Good times. But, like that's what it was. But I think if you change that cachet, it's going to change. And now you have a whole generation of kids, right? Like, and I feel like that is where that people are so scared to throw that kind of money at it and to make that kind of change, because they say, well, where is this money going to come from? But the unlocking of the human potential by having education, like by bringing your education system up 6 pegs, that is going to pay dividends so much. The kind of kids, the kind of adults you're going to be producing at that point, because I think right now the school system is supposed to produce adults and it produces children, right? Like that's what it is. And they keep them children, they keep them not questioning all those things. And we don't see anything of it. But now, even if it takes some trillions of dollars, you're going to have more trillions of dollars come out of it.
Yeah, but it takes so long.
You're right. That's exactly the thing. And now if you're the politician that makes that change, you're not going to see that for 18 years. Now you're
not going to be the one credited for it.
100%. So now you can't do that. But that's where those people, that's what I'm talking about, where you need somebody to kick in the back door and get into those places to make those changes and take that on the chin and be maybe not the most popular one, but their effects, they will be capable, right? That's what we need, is people that are brave and willing to do that and willing to take it on the chin and willing to fight. And I think that's coming. And I think those people are right now listening to podcasts and seeing that out and seeing the ways forward and trying to plan that. And it's going to happen. It's just going to take some time. Like I think that the dregs, or I feel like what we're seeing right now of how crazy things seem, bananas things seem, is the last kicks and screaming of a system that is holding on to their power, but more people are realizing. And I think that is what needs to change. And I feel like it can only go on so long. And I feel like it seems like it's getting more stressed and strenuous, and it's going to break at some point. And I feel like we're just getting closer and closer. It almost seems like I would have said the same thing like 4 years ago, though, of like, we're almost there. It looks like it can be breaking, and it just keeps turning. And it's just like there's so much money and so much power holding it together, putting band-aids, throwing duct tape, that Flex Seal stuff that they always throw on with these slaps it on. I feel like they're just slapping that on everywhere just to keep this thing together as it's torquing and twisting and trying not to snap. But as long as that stays together, they'll keep making their money. There's still billions of dollars will flow into the Apples and the Amazons and those of the world if they can keep that together. Whereas if that breaks, people are going to realize and they're going to say, hey, you can't make all the money. You can make a lot of money. We'll keep you there, but you can't make all the money. You can't have all the power. Facebook, you can't hold everybody hostage in the entire world on your system because that's what keeps you the most money. That's just not how things work, right? Like, but it's going to have to break before that happens. And I think you can buy a lot of flex tape or Flex Seal or whatever it's called, $1 trillion, right? Like it's you can pay a lot of politicians. You can donate a lot of money. You can influence, you can build entire lobbying groups, right? You can do a lot of things with a lot of money, with a lot of power. It's interesting, right? At the end of the day, I just think it's fascinating. That's why I talk about this all the time. I feel like once you understand it, once you see past the curtain, it is endlessly interesting. And I feel like that is one of the biggest optimistic points, is that as people start to realize it, and once you get woken up to a couple of the points and you start to see it, it's fascinating. And now you're right. Like when you talk about trying to keep up with politics, how boring and like just it makes you want to fucking jump in a hole when you think about trying to do that. That's boring, right? That's intentional. They want it to seem that way. But once you see what's really happening behind and why they're forcing it to be boring and why they're playing all these games, it becomes fascinating. Right. And I feel like that is their biggest downfall, is people are realizing that. And that's why people will listen to a 3-hour Joe Rogan podcast with, I don't know, somebody like Tim Pool or any of these guys that say this messaging better than me, like where I've gotten a lot of the ideas, where I've learned a lot of these pieces and put them together from all these little sorts. Someone will listen to 3 hours of this. Someone will listen to 3 hours of me and you talking about this and be really interested in, right? And they'll learn maybe one or two things. And then next time something happens, they'll have a more discerning eye to separate the bullshit and the reality and what they're actually doing. And I feel like that is super exciting to me, that more people are doing it. And that was something that I was so happy that I had these sources, and I just thought I could never be one of those people. But now, a couple months later, and I'm doing it, right? And people are realizing these things. It's cool to me. It's, I think the internet is the biggest sword that we have to fight against all that bureaucracy and bullshit that's happening and holding people down and keeping these, like, again, this is another one of those terms that, has been co-opted and people just turn off when they hear it. But systemic racism, it is real, and it's not real. It's not real in a lot of the ways that they're saying it's real, and they're stretching that term to find it in places where it doesn't exist. But for fucking sure it exists. Red line laws, like all these things. There's so many things that are real systemic racism, but that is the biggest thing we have to fight against, is the thing that are keeping those in place and making money off the back of it, right? Until you go after those and don't just let them get away with doing a little campaign that says they support you. Oh, they're good. They're the good guys. No, they're not. Like, that is so ridiculous that we allow that and put value on that. Like, we need to value real change and people actually trying things, right? You put Black Lives Matter on an NBA jersey, that doesn't do anything, right? Like I know, like where it's not to devalue awareness. Awareness is a big piece, but now we've gone. It used to be like 10% awareness and 90% trying to make change. Now it's 90% awareness, 10% of people actually trying to make change because it's the easy way out, right? Like if you want to make change and you look at it, I can just work for awareness or I can donate some money. I'll work for awareness, right? Like that's the easy way out.
Yeah, for sure.
But that's what keeps things how it is. That's what keeps things from changing.
Well, the crazy thing about systemic racism is like how the media can twist things with either side. It doesn't matter which side you're on, so that you see what they want you to see. Like with the event that happened in Montreal where Joyce Echaquan was given morphine and she was allergic to it and died very painfully.
Wow.
I know people who see that and say, well, the nurses never said anything about how she was Native, so that's not racism. It's like, how do you see that as being the point here?
Yeah.
You don't see stories about a white lady who is dying, suffering, and nurses are yelling at her for being a slut, having so many kids, being good for nothing except for having babies.
Yeah.
You don't see that from nurses to white people. So how do you not understand that that is racism?
Right. It's sad. And I think almost for myself, growing up where there was a ton of racism, right? Like particularly towards Native people, right? Like that was the biggest one, mainly because there was only white people and Native people. That's pretty much all we had where we grew up, right? There might have been like one black family in our whole town, right? Like, and for the most part, they probably experienced some racism, but I think it was such a novel thing that people didn't even know what to make of it. It was just kind of like, that's our black family in town. Like they're, didn't really have much, but it's funny to bring that word privilege back up, but I almost feel like it's a privilege to have gone through that and to have come out on the other side. Now I understand because now I can see it. And people want to say, there's no racism in Canada. We used to play fucking white versus brown football. In school, in grade school, the teacher saw us. Like,
that's awful.
I know, right? And I know that now, but at the time, it didn't seem like anything else. That was just what we did, right? And like to think back on that, that's crazy. And they say, there's no racism. Come on, right? My buddy got beat the fuck out of in a bathroom for being white. And there's and it goes both ways. And I think to pretend that it doesn't, and and I know they say that there's no racism towards white people. It can't be because of oppression, right? And I feel like that is one of the biggest things holding the movement back, is to understand that is like, I feel like that is one of the most racist things. I feel like by saying that you can't be racist to white people, it's to say that you can't hold other races to the same standard. Like, they get a pass because of all this sort of stuff. No, they're just as strong. They're just as capable as everybody else. And they should be held to the same standards. That to change standards for people is just as racist the other way, right? But you can't even bring that up. And I feel like that is one of the biggest things. If you would just admit to that and let people feel that and say that this is real too, but we still need to fight these things, because so many people don't even want to listen. They go, but they're racist to us and they don't even let us. Now they close their ears and they're so shut down to even hearing their side because they don't feel felt themselves. Whereas,
our racism is justified because white people suck.
Right, exactly, right? But like, I think but that is such a detrimental thing to getting white people on board, or some white people on board, right? That are so upset by that fact that they don't even give the time, where if they were to really listen to somebody's story that has gone through it, they would be moved and but they won't even give them the time because of something small like that. Whereas it's just such a small change they could make to their messaging, to their strategy, that would be 10 times more effective, right? Like, it's just so silly that they say like, we can't give an inch in the other way to find nuance. It's got to be all bad, like it's all racism, it's all bad. There's no things going the other way. And people, it's disingenuous. And if you give society and people anything, they are amazing at sniffing out disingenuousness, right? Like when somebody's phony, you can smell it from a while away. That is what humans have developed for evolutionarily in working in tribes, and to sniff that out. That is how you survive, right? We are amazing at it. So now you're messaging this message of anti-racism, which is probably one of the most racist things I've seen in forever. This anti-racist, this Abraham Kendi and these books and white fragility. It's the most racist stuff I've ever read. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's like, how is this happening? But then if you say that, you're labeled as this. But now if you would just be okay, like, yeah, that stuff is bad, but like this white fragility and all these things are racist as well. Instead of, no, if you have any questions for white fragility, if you question that book at all, you're a racist. And it's like, well, now that's disingenuous. People say, and now they just shut off altogether and not even listening, right? And now things get stuck, and now progress doesn't get made forward because now people aren't open to hearing these things, of these real things that are happening and people that are really struggling and real suffering that's happening in the world, but they're so closed down to it because you can't even have the conversation. It's again where you just can't shut down the conversation. You need to let people talk about these things. And sometimes that means the solutions they come up with you won't like, but that's life. You can't treat everybody, you can't silence everybody that has an opinion you don't like. That's not how the world works. But it seems like that's the strategy we want to go with, or that the people that are leading the charge on some of these movements of like anti-racism, that's the strategy that they're standing behind. And if they're saying this is the only strategy, like it doesn't matter. Even if your goal is to end racism too, if you don't come on with this strategy of this, you're just as bad. It's like,
you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, you're doing it wrong. It's like, how can you be, fighting racism wrong? Like, well, I shouldn't say that because I think they are, right? Like it's one of those things, but I think just to be open enough to realize maybe where your mistakes lie and maybe where you could get better, and not just thinking that you have it all figured out. And also, like, since when do white people have racism all figured out? Right? Like, that just seems like a non-starter to me. Like, how can you write a book called White Fragility and think you have this all figured out when you really don't even have an idea? Like, and then to vilify people for not getting on board with your way and your idea of it, instead of like, the biggest things that have moved me have all been personal stories to almost no other effect. I don't think anything else has moved me except genuine stories from people that have experienced these things. And that's what hits me. That's what makes me think, like that's what moves me forward. You hear these stories of racism and sexism and that are heartbreaking. That moves me. You yelling at me and calling me, if you don't put a Black Lives Matter sign in your door, that doesn't move anybody. Yelling at people has never changed anybody's mind in the world. When has that ever worked? Showing people compassion and trying to bring them over and showing them their story, that's what moves people. And to have that not understood and not be the forefront of our efforts to change these things is absolutely asinine to me. I do not understand it. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And I think, again, there's a lot of powers keeping that at bay, because if they can raise up the white fragilities of the world and this anti-racism, that keeps people from realizing the real issues at work, the real thing that are holding people in these poverty, that is the real socioeconomic issues and the real systemic racism that's holding people in these positions. It stops people from realizing that. It stops people from having conversations about that, because now it's just this one way. Interesting. I don't know. I don't know what it's going to change in the next couple of years. I'm so curious. I feel like I wish I just had a time machine, even if I couldn't change anything, just to go ahead and just see where things are going. Right? Like, yeah, they just have a little peeky poo. Yeah, just see what is changing, because it seems like it's got to be just around the corner, but it always feels like people have got to realize this. Like, it's going to be next week. People are going to realize this next week, and you see bits and pieces. Like I say, like with the COVID thing, it seems like everyone I talk to in the real world is right on board with me. Thinks very much similar way, right? Everyone I've talked to in the last 6 months thinks this is kind of ridiculous, but then nothing changes. And just, they're talking about going back into further lockdowns. It's like, what? Like, are we for real? Like,
yeah,
how is this happening? Like, it just doesn't make sense, right? Like, it almost seems like there's a disconnect where the people have no say, really, which is so funny to me with like technology, like blockchain technology, where you can't find some infinitely secure way that is completely transparent to have people have their voice heard. Like, how can we not have everybody have some sort of blockchain ID where they can vote on these things? Of, do we want to go for another lockdown, or do we want to investigate and bring more scenarios to the table, right? Like, it's not to say that we don't that, but like, even just to get that started where everybody can vote and say like, either lockdowns or let's look for some more options. Which lockdown will be one of them that we can choose between? That's the first step. Okay. Oh, people voted lockdowns. Let's do lockdowns. Fine. Now I'm all for it. If everybody across Canada voted for it and we said lockdowns and that's the way, I don't agree with it, but hey, that's democracy for me. Let's go, baby. I'll lock down. Let's do it. But now if we didn't, okay, now we voted to find other options. Okay. Now our other options is, more education, opening some things up smartly, right? A couple of those things, investing in rapid testing, going full Florida, maybe that's one of the options. Hey, we're over it. This isn't what it is. Some people that are at risk are going to have to hold it down, right? I would hope that that's not what people would vote for. I hope they would have more compassion. I don't think they would. I think they'd be somewhere more in the middle. But you give all those options, now we vote again, right? Like, I think that is the next level of it. I feel like technology in society is getting towards them. There's so many people holding it back because nobody wants that. None of these power structures, because now You think Facebook wants that? So now they do another vote saying, do you think Facebook has too much power? Should we try and break it up? And everybody across the country votes. Oh, yeah. Now they don't want that. They don't want that to happen. So and same with all these things, Amazon, all these things. There's so many ways that people don't want to have people have that much power. There's so much that works without keeping people away from power, right? So it's interesting, but I don't see any other way. I think that's the way things are going, and we're going to naturally get to that evolution. It's going to be how long can they stretch it out and hold things back to keep making as much money in the time being. I think even the people that are at the top, I think the Amazons of the world know that it's only a matter of time. They're just making as much money before that happens as they can, right? And blocking it, slowing it down, and all that stuff. And unfortunately, one of the consequences of that, one of the byproducts is the propagation of these racist and sexist things, right? Because that's what's holding us from change. It's wildly interesting to me. Like I said, I find it so fascinating. But I want to ask you about all your crafts.
All my crafts.
All your crafts. I feel like you always have a craft on the go, all sorts of crafts. Have you always been into crafts? I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't at least get a little bit into it. Like, did you like sew growing up, or like?
Yeah, my grandma taught me how to sew when I was 10 years old.
Yeah.
The first quilt that I made is the ugliest thing you will ever see.
What color is it?
It's a mixture of like flowery purple print with red and pink, and I'll send you a picture.
It sounds
if
beautiful.
I have one. It's very ugly.
Maybe that's the
terrible.
picture I'll put on the post when I release this episode as your first quilt.
I actually don't know if I have a picture. I'll have to
now
go
the
home.
pictures go away. I see.
I'll have to go home when I'm at home in April. I'll send you a picture.
Okay.
It's terrible.
Oh, that's funny.
For other crafts, I never actually learned how to knit until I was in university.
Oh, yeah?
So, and then I just fell in love with it because it's so nice to sit in front of the TV and just knit.
Yeah.
Instead of doing nothing.
Yeah.
I hate sitting still.
Me too.
I can't handle it.
That's actually the impetus of how I got so into podcasts was now I have something I can put in my ears and I can play a video game or I can do something, or same with audiobooks. I think that was probably the first one when I found I can listen to, because I've read Harry Potter so many times. I could put it on 6 times speed and take it in. I still know what the gist, but now I can play a video game and read a book at the same time. Holy man, I can drive and I can learn. That was something. So I totally feel like the fact that you can be doing multiple things at once. Oh, I'm all about that. That is how I frame my whole life around finding ways to do that. More efficiency, more ways that I can get multiple things done at once. I love it.
Yeah. And I also grew up really far out of town. So my mom had to entertain us in some way.
Yeah.
So there was lots of different stuff that she got us to do. Yeah. I loved riding horses back in the day too. That was a big thing. But I also did a lot of baking. Yeah. And I still do a lot of baking. Yeah. If I'm ever stressed out, I'll just whip up some bread and knead. And
oh, nice.
It's great. So that's another thing that I do. I've been really getting into quilting again. Yeah. And the one that I just made is just so beautiful.
It is. I agree.
And I was so excited to finish it that I've just immediately started a new one. Yeah. And I'm very excited about this one. I'm already 1/5 of the way done.
Nice. You're going to be just quilting up a storm, hey?
Yeah. Oh. And the crappy thing is it's super expensive.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
The fabric, I spent $200 on fabric for just the front of this quilt.
You need to get a fabric sponsor.
I know.
Start an Instagram page for your quilting and get a sponsorship.
I'm not that good.
Well, who knows? Maybe we'll be in a couple of years.
One day.
All the changes. If you start getting obsessed with it, maybe you will be. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, no, I knew I had to ask about that. I just looked down at the clock and realized we've gone over 3 hours, and I thought we were at an hour and a half. I feel like it always doesn't feel like it was 3 hours, but this one especially feel like it. We didn't even take a bathroom break.
No.
That was amazing.
I do have to pee though.
Yeah, me too. Well, there's a couple other things I had to hit crafts for sure. I was going to maybe get into some running stuff, but maybe we'll save that for next time. Is there anything else that we missed and we didn't hit that we should have talked about? Anything else?
I don't think so. I guess we'll just save whatever else I have to blab on about for next time.
Yeah, I think so. And hopefully next time we'll be able to get actually into the old studio at the university. We can go back in our old stomping grounds. I'm sure that'll pull a few more stories out of the memory banks when we step back.
Oh boy.
Yeah. maybe some of those stories should stay in the past. Hey, Jen?
Yeah, actually, I reached out to Sam after I listened to that episode, and he was telling me, or like reminding me about some of the things that we got up to, and he's like, yeah, I wasn't going to bring up that stuff.
Yeah. We'll just leave those ones in the past. I think every once in a while we can bring the funny ones. That's why I'm excited to get like a couple, like also to bring some lister people on at the same time. Like I want to do one with like maybe me, Chase, Fraser, and Pat or something, right? Like where we can really bring some of the old stories out and get some of those old ones. Like it's just about figuring this out. It's hard enough with one person, like getting all this technology set up. You got to see me struggle for 10 minutes trying to get this set up. Couldn't get the headphones working right. That's pretty much every time before the podcast. So once I get a little more established, maybe have a, home base where I can go back to and leave everything set up. We'll get some of those going, and I'm sure we'll get you on one of those. We can bring some of those stories back. We'll probably have to keep a couple of those in the past where they need to stay. But I think there's some of the more medium stories that we could bring out and tell. Maybe some of the old Skulk highlights, some King Louis stuff. Yeah.
Oh man.
Well,
good times.
Such good times. Well, speaking of good times, I had such a good time. Thank you so much for coming on. I only had to bug you about it 6 times.
All right. I hope you guys enjoyed that.
You made it happen, and I
really
had such a
enjoyed
good
this
time. So thanks for
conversation
coming
with
on,
Jen.
Jen.
I hope you guys
no
enjoyed
problem.
it
It
too.
was nice chatting.
Hope you guys are doing well.
Right. Bye, everybody.
And really making the best of this weather, the longer days, the sun shining. Get outside. I know they're trying to put restrictions on outside still, but fuck those restrictions. If you're outside, just be smart. Still, don't do anything silly, but get outside, get that vitamin D, enjoy yourself, smile a little bit, see some people you haven't seen. It'll do more than you think. So other than that, still really looking for help with the podcast. Anybody has guest suggestions, wants to help out with editing, with game planning, with marketing, with all that stuff. I need help all over the place, and I'm just looking for somebody that's passionate and enjoys this podcast. So if you're a fan of the podcast, just reach out, because that's the only precursor. You don't need to have any sort of skills or any sort of knowledge. Just if you're a fan of this podcast and you can kind of, if you think you see what I'm trying to do here, you have something to add, just reach out and we'll make it happen. We can train you up with all those skills, and we can learn together on so much of this stuff. It's just about having another mind to kind of bounce things off of. That's all I really need in a lot of these situations. And if you can add a lot, that's great. If you can add a little, that's great. It's just about the process and finding my process, and any help in that domain would be amazing. Yeah, like I said, follow the social medias, give the post a share, tell somebody about this podcast if you enjoy it. And can't wait to bring out the rest of these episodes that I got banked up, and some of the big guests we got on the horizon. So, all right, you guys have a great week, and I'll see you on the next one.